Again, everybody in the meeting, please hide your video. Please mute your microphone. The only people we should see are the trustees and the superintendent.
Okay.
All right, Mr. President, are you ready for me to take roll?
Yes, sir, please.
All right, if all the board members would show themselves, please. I'm going to begin roll. Jason Burdine,
Here.
Allison Drew,
Here.
Addie Helliger, Grail James,
This is Grail, I'm here.
Jim Rice,
Jim Rice is here.
Dave Rosenthal,
I am here.
and Kristen Tossan.
I'm here.
And staff, Deanna Saavedra,
I am here, Dr. Dupree.
Brian Gwynn,
Yes, sir, I am here.
Anthony Delicato,
Yes, sir, I'm here, Dr. Dupree.
Beth Martinez, Beth, Oscar Perez,
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Long Pham.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
We have Lieutenant Michael Harvey with us in place of Chief Ryder this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree.
Oh, hold on, we're not done yet. Lieutenant Harvey, are you with us?
You cut off.
I'm here for Chief Ryder.
Okay. Joe Rodriguez,
Yes, sir, Dr. Dupree, present.
Robert Scamardo,
Yes, sir, Robert Scamardo, present.
Veronica Sofer,
Veronica Sofer here.
Gwen Touche,
Gwen Touche here.
and Board Counsel Rick Morris.
Here.
All right, Mr. President, I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. It is 6:01 p.m. and this meeting is hereby called to order. We have the presence of a quorum attending on video conference. Notice of this meeting has been posted online for at least 72 hours. On March 16, 2020, Governor Greg Abbott granted a request by Attorney General Ken Paxton to temporarily suspend a limited number of open meeting law to the extent necessary to allow telephonic or video conference meetings in response to the coronavirus COVID-19. In accordance with those suspended rules, Fort Bend ISD certifies the following. Although members of the board are not gathered in a central physical location, we do have a quorum in attendance at this meeting by video conference. This meeting is being held by video conference because the convening at one location of a quorum of the governmental body is not appropriate during the COVID-19 public health emergency. Based on current guidance from the federal, state, and county authorities concerning large gatherings and social distancing during the COVID-19 public health emergency, there is no established location for an audience to observe the meeting. However, the live stream of meeting video and audio is available and accessible through a YouTube link that was timely and appropriately provided to the public and media as part of the meeting posting, through a news release and via the district's website. As we would at any in-person meeting, members of the public who have followed the standard instructions for registering to speak during the public comment portion will be allowed 3 minutes to speak. All other meeting procedures will adhere to board adopted procedures to the extent practicable. Even though this meeting is being live streamed on the district's website and on the district's YouTube channel, an audio and video recording of this meeting is being made and will be available to the public on the district's website. All board members, staff, and other participants will identify themselves by name when they speak. Board votes will be taken by roll call. First this evening is going to be our Pledge of Allegiance. Mrs. Drew, are you there?
I'm here only on audio.
Okay. Jace and Jade Drew, who are ninth grade in the ninth grade at Elkins, are going to lead us through our U.S. Pledge and Texas Pledge. Please stand. Stand up, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the Texas, one state under God, one indivisible.
Thank you. Please remain standing for our silent invocation. You may be seated. Next on our agenda this evening are our recognitions. Our Chief Communications Officer, Veronica Sofer, will present those. Go ahead, Mrs. Sofer, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, sir. We've got a few PowerPoint slides to accompany our presentation this evening and our recognition. We're going to start with Megan Praveen, a student at Fort Settlement Middle School. She was awarded the middle school category winner at the National Character Education Day Color the World in Character Poster Contest. Congratulations to Megan. Next, we're going to move on to Destination Imagination. We had some outstanding teams participate in the virtual DI Global Finals Tournament. And with over 2,200 submissions from all over the world, the 3 Fort Bend ISD teams that I'm going to show you tonight placed impressively and were recognized at the closing ceremony. So we're going to start here with the first team that you see on the screen, Sixth Dimension from Cornerstone Elementary. We have Anshul Javeri, Ariel Shah, Shawani Sundaramurthy, and Emily Chan. Congratulations. From Quail Valley Middle School, we have Rithik Agarwal, Rishab Agarwal, with their outstanding coaches, Jagisha Doshi and Linda Christensen. I think the next picture we have is going to be Team Radicals from Dulles High School. We're also going to recognize Sartarsha Middle School students here. So we've got Anshumi Javeri, Shreya Sundaramurthy, Ishan Kade, Reina Patel, and then moving on to Sartarsha Middle School, Sachi Jain, Ranil Shah, with their fantastic coaches, Jagisha Doshi. Yes, Jagisha Doshi for Sartarsha. Congratulations. Next, we have the Thinking Tornadoes, also from Sartarsha Middle School, Anya Aurora, Sarah Cutler-Rawala, Arshi Shah, Rayan Shah, Rehan Shah, Sadiksha Allery, and their coach is Maria Cutler-Rawala. Congratulations to our DI teams. Great job representing Fort Bend. Next, I'd like to recognize Sydney Plemons, a student from Austin High School. She was awarded the Texas Female Recipient of the Texas High School Athletic Directors Association's 2020 Whataburger Scholar. So congratulations to Sydney for being named the 2020 Whataburger Scholar. Good job. We also would like to give a special congratulations to Mike Deswald, athletic manager at the Fort Bend ISD Natatorium. He was recognized by the Texas Interscholastic Swim Coaches Association and awarded the Theron Pickle Lifetime Achievement Award for his 22-year commitment to Fort Bend ISD and more than 40 years of athletic administration. He is a mentor to coaches and an advocate for swim, dive, and water polo. Mr. Deswalt's impact has been felt in everything from revolutionizing athletic competitions to his valued input building a state-of-the-art athletic facility in Fort Bend ISD. Congratulations to Mr. Deswalt, and thank you for representing Fort Bend ISD so well. That concludes our report.
Thank you, Mrs. Sofer. Great job and congratulations to all those who were just recognized. Next on our agenda this evening is going to be our audience items. The board encourages and welcomes comments and input from our patrons, but we cannot respond, deliberate, or decide regarding any subject that is not included on the posted agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes and please refrain from mentioning a student or employee's name when voicing a concern or complaint, as board policy provides alternative procedures through the grievance process, policies GF local and DGBA local, to seek resolution to complaints. The superintendent's office, human resources, and administration in general can assist you in finding those procedures online. The following procedures will apply to tonight's audience comments. I will read the name of the person registered to speak and share that they have 3 minutes to make their comments. Prior to speaking, the speaker must share the video and unmute their microphone. Once the speaker starts his or her comments, Mr. Rozier will announce that they have 30 seconds remaining. And once the 3-minute time limit has expired, and whether or not the speaker has concluded his or her comments, Mr. Rozier will mute the microphone and remove them from the meeting. With that being said, may we hear from, I'm not sure if it's Mr. or Mrs. Dell Davidson. Mr. Rozier.
I can begin.
Go ahead, ma'am. You'll have 3 minutes. Start whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Board of Trustees, Board President Burdine, and Superintendent Dr. Dupree. My name is Mamori Del Davidson. I'm here to speak in support of Board Goal 1 as a member of the FBISD Equity Coalition and current student of Ridge Point High School, particularly on your desire to create an equitable learning environment. As you may know, FBISD is not immune to the uncontrolled spread of racism and discrimination throughout this country, which is why myself and the Equity Coalition encourage you to read our demands, which contain policy on how you will go about ensuring that the district provides this equitable learning environment, the importance of which cannot be stressed enough, as our coalition has received hundreds of devastating reports of anti-Blackness and discrimination from students in elementary, middle, and high school. These students either felt like nothing would be done or they were ignored by administration. That is why we support your goal of equitable learning, because in order to achieve a truly fair learning environment, we must institute a culture change in our schools. And that begins with policy that students can turn to know they are protected. We need to expand the Student Code of Conduct to explicitly define racism, discrimination, and hate speech related terms, to protect staff and students, uphold anti-discrimination policies for all extracurriculars and UIL so that students aren't forcibly subjected to hateful language, ban offensive symbols associated with white supremacy that have permeated our schools, require faculty, staff, and district leaders to undergo cultural competency and anti-racism training so that this district can better protect students of color, reevaluate the roles and discipline of individuals who perpetuate discriminatory language and actions, create equity audits to monitor the progression of Goal 1 to ensure its longevity and effectiveness, and create a separate district-wide anti-racism policy to show students that FBISD cares and to protect them when they inevitably face racism. The time to implement these changes is right now. And though this pandemic has caused heartbreak and frustration, I remain immensely grateful that this district will have time to put these changes into effect while the kids are still at home. I know the latter part of your goal is to ensure that all students have access to the FBISD curriculum. But first, we must make sure that curriculum is taught in an equitable and racially competent manner. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking this evening. Next is Mr. Ahmad Al-Jabari.
Can I begin?
You can begin whenever you'd like, sir. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Ahmed Al-Jabouri, and I am a student at William B. Travis High School. I'm here today as a member of the FBISD Equity Coalition, and I have concerns in regards to how the staff in our schools respond to issues such as a lack of safe spaces for BI, POC, and other minority groups. After sending out a survey to students of Fort Bend ISD, I've seen the injustices that many face. Whether it was a form of outright discrimination or hidden mistreatment, one prominent issue I noticed was the lack of safe spaces for BI, POC, and LGBTQIAN+. In other minority communities, such as oppressed religious groups, while minority clubs do exist and the students there do feel safe, they shouldn't only feel safe in an after-school club. Students from marginalized backgrounds should not feel restricted to BI, POC, and LGBTQ+, and minority-based groups for comfort and support. Furthermore, at Austin High School, the African Student Association was referred to as the African Stripper Association, and at Travis High School, the Muslim Student Association was referred to as, and I quote, the Bomb Squad. Creating policies and taking action to protect these groups will help promote diversity and amplify all student voices, and help facilitate imperative and much needed discourse within schools and across the district, recognizing the intersectionality of issues like these. Change is necessary in order to promote vulnerability and transparency to the underlying problems of our school districts. Overall, I believe that if FBISD adopts these changes, as stated in Goal 5 of the board agenda, our school districts can truly develop an organizational culture that embraces care, respect, safety, and inclusion. I'm grateful for having the opportunity to speak in front of all of you today and recognize that the district is considering our call for change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for speaking this evening. May I have Mr. or Mrs. Sana, S-A-N-N-E-H? I apologize. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name.
Okay.
Please pronounce your name for me.
Ayo Sane.
Okay, thank you. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
Hello, my name is Ayo Sane, and I currently attend Ridgepoint High School, and I'm a firm supporter of the FBISD Equity Coalition. I support the coalition because while FBISD claims to be an all-inclusive district, the actions of its staff say otherwise. I remember countless times where there were incidences that showed just how bigoted the staff was, and on the slim occurrence that we would report it, it would be laughed off, promptly dismissed, or just left unresolved, and with the guilty party facing no consequences. The culture at the schools that I and thousands of other kids have attended in FBISD just goes to show that when you do report it, you're either being over dramatic, or when you don't report it, you're a doormat. Although I am very glad the district is finally facing its problems, I think it's important that we acknowledge that possibly thousands of students were left hurt and feeling like their struggles weren't that severe, or the fact that at graduation, Mr. Dupree told them not to use this as an opportunity to protest. I love FBISD and its students, but from the fact that we don't teach African American history and quote unquote normal history doesn't show the full picture, not only with racial injustice, but also with LGBTQIA+ injustices and hardships, I can't help but think that we need change and we need it soon. By following the demands made by the coalition, I think these issues will be addressed and not only fixed, but be made known. And if you don't actually change with these demands, you will continue to foster a place of hatred and bigotry. And that's exactly what FBISD stands against. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. May I have Mr. Muhammad Fatou, please?
Yes, can you all hear me?
We can hear you. Please state your name, and whenever you're ready, you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Muhammad Fatou. I'm an alumnus from Kepner High School, now at the University of Houston Law Center, thank God. I'm here today as a supporter also of the FBISD Equity Coalition, and I want to strongly endorse the coalition's demand number 5 to re-examine the relationship with school police and security in all FBISD schools, right? So as we all know, we're in a powerful moment right now with the current movement for Black liberation in this country. So it's a moment for us to be creative, right? We can imagine and question institutions that we've always kind of accepted as being the norm, right? Growing up, I always thought, okay, the police are here to protect us, no worries. It's for the best, so on and so forth. However, clearly that's not the case for everyone, right? So before I go into the specifics of the coalition's demand about, re-examining their relationship with police at schools, I want to take a quick step back, right? Let's look at the brief history about where policing in this country specifically stemmed from, right? Which was first as slave patrols, right? Catching runaway slaves, catching Native Americans, right? So that's what police were first made for in this country. Then it became, okay, breaking up labor unions for those who were requesting better working conditions, all right? Then it went to enforcing Jim Crow, okay? And so from that point on, the laws in this country changed, right? To where police shouldn't be doing bad things, but the police itself as an institution never hit that reset button, right? So when you have an organization like the police, and this was kind of both in the North and the South in this country, as we all know, having this culture for years and years and years, where it was predicated on targeting certain groups of people in this country, of course, we're still going to have police violence today because the laws changed, but we didn't change the institution of police on our own, right? So with that foundation in mind, I want us to be creative, right? And a lot of school districts around the country are doing that in this powerful moment, right? Passing resolutions to maybe move funding to other areas. And that brings me into going briefly over some of the baby steps that we can take under the coalition's demands about examining relationship with the police. So number one, we can increase funds for social work services and reduce the funds on security and monitoring, right? So according to the 2020-2021 adopted budget, FBI ISD is going to spend almost $9.2 million on security and monitoring, but will only spend $1.8 million on, quote, social work services, right? That's a 9-to-1
30
ratio.
seconds remaining.
Thank you. And so investing in social programs and services would definitely reduce the need for police presence in schools in the first place, right? On the same note, having a third-party committee of experts to investigate excessive punishment, looking at how police presence actually causes students to feel more unsafe, specifically Black and brown students, obviously. And so on that note, thank you all for allowing me to speak today. And I hope we can fulfill FBI State's goal to provide an environment where students are comfortable and promote vulnerability and transparency to the underlying problems of our district. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking this evening. Next, Mr. David Lineman.
Hello. Should I enable the webcam or no?
Yes, sir, if you can.
There you go.
All right, just please state your name, sir, and then whenever you want to start, you'll have 3 minutes.
Sure. Hi, my name is Dave Linneman. I'm the father of 2 children in Fort Bend ISD. Thank you, Dr. Dupree and the board. I realize it's been a long day. There was various technical problems and the first day stress of teachers and students. So congratulations to everyone for actually making it through. So I speak for a growing group of Fort Bend ISD families who feel very strongly that our children are best served by in-person education and that we need this choice back as quickly as possible. We know that Fort Bend ISD and the board want to be accountable to parents in the clearest, most transparent way possible. You've all said that. However, some of us feel that the needs of working families have not been considered and that we are not really given the information we need and deserve to make proper decisions. So, we're here trying to establish a dialogue and pass this information on to other concerned parents and hopefully make some progress. So, in short, we believe that in-person schooling, including all the services, sports, and extracurricular activities that go with it, are really the only way to give a quality education experience. Online school is just not an acceptable substitute. I've spoken to hundreds of families over the last few months, and there's just literally 1,000 little disasters that are happening every day, from technical and scheduling problems to special needs kids who are not getting served, to sports, to underprivileged families that can't, even possibly manage not only getting a computer, but managing and training the online access. It's just an education, an economic disaster that just it's unsustainable. So we hope to move forward. We also believe that in-person school, if it does return, should not be so restrictive that becomes pointless. That everyone is best served by working for a live school model that's realistic with procedures recognizing that there's going to be a virus. It won't go away, but we still need to live and make choices. Finally, we believe that our Fort Bend ISD families deserve to know when we can realistically expect to go back to school in person. And this means honesty and transparency about the data being used to make decisions. What is the source of the data? Is it subject to errors or manipulations? Are experts being drawn from both camps of thinking, the go to school and the stay home from school? To some of us, it's well documented that the code red system used by Fort Bend is vague and has some serious drawbacks. So we'd like to improve in that area. I mean, to me, it's crazy, just in summary, that we could go out to dinner and sit 6 around a table without masks, but can't send our kids back to school. Have we really tried hard to work out an effective plan to return, or are we pandering to a political agenda or even relying on bad data? People just sincerely want to know. I'm pleased to learn that part of tonight's meeting is a first step towards establishing these
30
methods.
seconds remaining.
But the data needs to be trustworthy and valid. We need to hold ourselves accountable to the same standards we would hold our children: intellectual rigor and honesty and transparency. Thank you for your time. As parents, we actually want to be part of the solution, and we look forward to providing feedback as we move forward. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you for speaking this evening, sir. Next on our agenda is our information items. First is going to be 6A1, our facilities management follow-up audit, Dr. Dupree.
Mr. Burdine, I would like to propose that we take a brief break since Miss Allison Drew is having trouble getting into the call, and we're working with her diligently trying to get her in. You're now muted, sir.
Should we get back together in like 3 or 4 minutes? What would you suggest?
Well, we've been working with her for a few minutes, and I think if we can take maybe 5 minutes, it might be, I can do a touch base and see how, well, here, this looks like she may be joining us now.
All right. We'll wait just a second here. Mrs. Drew, can you hear us yet?
She's on the phone with tech support, or she was.
All right. We'll let's get back together here at 6:30 if we want to just take a quick break. Let's give her just a few minutes. Let's get back together at 6:30.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, Jeremy, so that's what
Okay.
happened the
Yes,
last
ma'am.
time.
So
I'm
I
not-
see it. And if you
Yeah.
try to join the audio right here, it doesn't do that. Did you fix that? I mean, down in your, so you're just trying to join via your phone?
Yeah, because my
We can hear
speaker
you
for some
guys.
reason-
We can hear you
hi.
guys.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
you're live.
Yeah, request. I'm in the request control. Did you mute? Let's see. Okay. Let's see.
Allison and Jeremy.
Yeah, so Jeremy, apparently we're live, so I'm going to drop this.
Gonna say,
We'll continue to work.
we're going to get back together at 6:30, Allison. We're going live
Thank
at
you.
6:30. Okay.
Oh, okay, 1 minute, no pressure. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
All right, let's go live.
Mr. President, we are recording and live on Facebook.
All right. Mrs. Bossan and Mr. Rosenthal. Mrs. Drew, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Dr. Dupree, we have information items next on our agenda. 6A1 being our facilities management follow-up audit. Whenever you're ready, sir.
Well, that would actually be Greg Gibson.
I'm sorry. Mr. Gibson, I don't see you here. There you go.
Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, President Burdine, members of the board, Dr. Dupree. My name is Greg Gibson. I'm president of Gibson Consulting Group. We are proud to serve as the internal auditors for Fort Bend ISD with the overarching objective of continuous improvement in all of its programs and operations. And in that context, we present to you tonight the results of our facilities management follow-up audit. If you go to the next slide. The agenda for this presentation is to do introductions. I've introduced myself. Also with us tonight is Kent Ingram, who's a senior auditor in our firm, and he conducted most of the work for this project, and he will be doing the bulk of the presentation. And he will be discussing kind of the background of this audit, the follow-up audit results, and then will be both available to address any questions the board might have. So Kent, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Greg. And you can go on to the next slide, please. So first, I just wanted to provide a quick background on what a follow-up audit is, and then discuss the timetable and the areas we address in this follow-up audit. So I wanted to note here that a follow-up audit is really different from a full scope or original audit. In a follow-up audit, we're only checking on the implementation status of the recommendations we made in the original audit. We obtain management's estimate of the implementation statuses from our quarterly internal audit dashboard updates. From that, we develop an interview protocol and testing strategy and a data analysis strategy to develop an independent assessment of implementation status. You can go on, please. The original audit, which served as a foundation for this follow-up, was finalized in March 2017. Our follow-up audit began in July 2019 and was concluded in November 2019. You can move on, please. As you can see here, the initial audit included 5 areas of focus. Each area included recommendations for improvement, which were assessed in our follow-up audit. And next slide, please. In this section, I want to provide an overview of the audit results and a breakdown of implementation status by recommendation. Overall, we did see substantial progress in 2 key areas. First, an energy plan was adopted and goals were set to reduce usage. And there was also an improvement in monitoring of energy usage and cost. So that was really positive for us to see. The second win we wanted to highlight was the amount of preventative maintenance being performed on HVAC equipment increased. And there was a big focus and push by management to replace and repair some outdated chillers and then monitor the maintenance on those chillers. So that was something we wanted to highlight. However, improvement was still needed in many areas. One challenge we ran into during our follow-up audit was a lack of audit evidence. So there's a lot of cases where we heard some really great things that were being done, but there was nothing for us, no evidence available to assess the impact or efficacy of any changes that were made by management. I wanted to highlight here too that management is aware of the shortfall and has agreed with us on all implementation statuses. And I know that they're actively working to fully implement our recommendations. And there's probably been some movement made on this too, since this follow-up audit was completed a while ago. Out of 17 recommendations for the original audit, we found 3 to be completely implemented, 1 to be substantially implemented, 10 to be partially implemented, and 3 where the implementation had not started yet. These next 3 slides provide a table which include the audit recommendations and management's evaluated status and our status. I'm going to briefly chat about the recommendations that we concluded were partially implemented or not started. So recommendation 1 was to develop a plan that identified program goals, processes, prioritization mechanisms, and then a way to monitor progress against those goals. We learned that management has not documented or decided on goals that align with the greater goals of the district, which is the first step in this process. That drove us to decide that the recommendation was not started. When assessing recommendation 2, we found that some performance data was being used by management. However, there was no performance monitoring framework in place. To help with this implementation, we included a list of example KPIs that management could consider tracking and using. So again, there was some data being reviewed, work order data, chiller maintenance data. However, there was not a strong framework in place. So we concluded that was partially complete. Our third recommendation was to increase training rigor and frequency. We did note some improvements in this area, notably in new hire training for custodians and also training for HVAC staff. However, during our interviews, several staff and management members stated that training still needs strengthening in frequency and depth. We did note some goals in place for increasing training for custodians. However, there was no associated action plan for realizing those goals. At the wider departmental level, we also didn't see any evidence of training goals, objectives, or timelines for completion. So that led us to conclude that it is partially complete. Our fourth recommendation is about the legal policy requirements to have a written hazard communication program and formal documentation proving that all employees who handle hazardous materials are trained. So we learned in this follow-up that management is primarily relying on licensing agencies to provide the required training only for a select few employees. No formal training program was implemented by management. And at the time of this audit, there was no formal plan to create one. I think this is possibly a recommendation that has seen some changes since our follow-up, so I wanted to highlight that. Recommendation 5 was about developing and implementing standing operating procedures, or SOPs. SOPs are very beneficial as they improve implementation consistency across the district and also help management identify procedures that may need improving. During this follow-up, we noted that SOPs were being developed. The maintenance SOP was in a preliminary stage. It was still gathering feedback, and there was not a formal timeline for completion for that document. On a positive note, the custodian SOP was very close to completion. And so when we combined evidence for the maintenance SOP and custodian SOP, we ultimately concluded that it was a partially complete recommendation. Our sixth recommendation was just about improving and enhancing the preventive maintenance program. During our original audit, we found that maintenance was primarily reactive. There was not a lot of PM going on. This is something that is sadly common to see across a lot of districts. It could be a lack of resources or planning or anything like that. But one thing we did highlight in our original audit was that PM needs to be increased. Our interviews and data analysis showed that some improvement had been made, especially within HVAC preventive maintenance, which I highlighted earlier. However, during our follow-up audit, we didn't see any preventive maintenance schedules or plans for many asset classes. And we also didn't see any targets for preventive maintenance levels. And so the lack of PM schedules and plans for many asset classes and targets for PM led us to conclude that this recommendation was partially complete. Our seventh recommendation was to develop a staffing plan for HVAC maintenance. And I'll just highlight here, at the time, we were, as a district, planning on doing all HVAC maintenance in-house. This was during the original audit back in a few years ago. That was the plan. And so we assessed, had anything been done to prepare the district for that. We saw that management does use a work order time to complete target to influence staffing decisions for HVAC maintenance. However, audit evidence proving that implementation could not be obtained. And this was also a recommendation where there was change in district strategy subsequent to our original audit. And so I do not believe that the plan anymore is to go completely in-house for HVAC maintenance. On the next slide, we have recommendation 8, which was to make some improvements to the maintenance parts purchase process. Our original audit found that this was a slightly inefficient process that took a lot of time. When we went back in this follow-up audit, we did see that manual requisition forms are still used for parts purchases. However, there was some improvement in HVAC procurement that has increased in speed due to parts being procured separately from the warehouse. That was slightly split out. That process would help them get some high needs parts quicker for HVAC maintenance. There was no evidence available to us to assess the efficacy on any other changes in the parts procurement process. So because of that, we concluded that it was partially complete. Our 9th recommendation was about developing a kind of recurring safety inspection program. Our original audit discovered some safety concerns within district shops. During the follow-up audit, we did determine that the shops were in much better shape, though there were still some concerns that we noted. However, there was not a formal inspection program implemented, and so management was still relying on an ad hoc approach to safety checkups. So that led us to conclude that it was a partially complete recommendation. On the next slide, we have recommendation 12. Our original audit found that workloads for custodians varied substantially across campuses. We created a staffing matrix. A staffing matrix was created by management, I apologize, to show this inequity and request additional resources to help correct this problem. This ultimately resulted in 25 additional custodians being hired. However, we performed a data analysis and it still showed that there was a high level of workload inequity across campuses during our follow-up audit. Though there was some evidence of management using workload to help request staff, the number of additional custodians did not seem to be based on any standards or productivity targets, and our analysis still showing the high inequity led us to conclude that the recommendation was partially complete. For recommendation 13, we originally discovered that the work schedules for custodians varied greatly from elementary schools, where a majority of the hours were during the school day, to secondary schools, where the majority of hours are after school each day. And why that's important is that it's a lot easier and a lot more efficient to clean a building after hours for custodians. Don't have to worry about interrupting instruction or any teachers or students being around. And so what we were recommending was kind of standardize the shift schedules and also change them to allocate more time to after hours cleaning. Our interviews and analysis showed that schedules were still being determined by the lead custodians at each campus, and they were not standardized from campus to campus. Because of that, we couldn't really monitor, there was no central monitoring or analysis being performed of work times across different campuses. So that reduced some of the evidence we could get from an audit standpoint. A plan was created by management to standardize shift times for all custodians. This plan did show a large increase in night shift work. However, during our follow-up audit, this plan was still being vetted and reviewed, with the target implementation occurring the next school year, we believe. We're not sure how this has changed due to the current environment we find ourselves in. So all that evidence led us to conclude that recommendation 13 was partially complete. Our 14th recommendation, this results from our original audit finding that there is a high amount of overtime occurring in the operations department due to a lack of substitute employees for custodians. And so instead of having a substitute, they would pull custodians from a different campus, which would then result in the campus that had staff being pulled having to work additional hours to perform the same cleaning that they otherwise would have done with the full team. So one thing we recommended to help that was a substitute pool. After the original audit, management decided to pursue some alternative methods to reduce overtime, such as modifying cleaning procedures when a custodian is absent. However, there was no documentation available to determine what the modified cleaning standards are. We performed a data analysis, which still showed that overtime remains high within that department. And so we are recommending that management formalize and communicate out their modified cleaning procedures. And that evidence led us to conclude that the recommendation was not started. On the last slide, we have recommendation 16. And our original audit found that cleanliness inspections were not being consistently performed, and the results were not being analyzed systematically by the district. In our follow-up, we discovered that some inspections of custodial performance do occur monthly as part of preventive maintenance checks that are done by lead custodians. However, the rigor of the inspection is not sufficient to conclude on the cleanliness and sanitation of the school. More thorough checks are occurring on an ad hoc basis without guidelines or rubrics in place. And further, inspection results are not being formally kept, and customer feedback is not being solicited to determine the efficacy of the custodial function. So because of that evidence, we concluded that the recommendation was partially complete. And with that, I'll turn it over to any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Ingram. Mr. Rice has a few questions or comments whenever you're ready, Mr. Rice.
Thank you, President Burdine. I just wanted to make a few comments for those in the audience that in 2005, the Texas legislature conferred upon the Board of Trustees the responsibility of conducting internal audits in every school district in the state of Texas. And we have chosen in Fort Bend to outsource this effort rather than hire one internal auditor, and simply because no one person can possess the requisite skills, knowledge, and experience necessary to perform the multitude of audits that are taking place in Fort Bend ISD. So we conduct audits on a wide range of activities every year. Once the audit is, the auditors have completed their task, they meet with the administration to review and compare notes and give the administration an opportunity to comment and respond. And then they go back and present to the audit committee. And once the audit committee has accepted the report, it is then presented to the full board. And once the board accepts and approves this, it is subject to public scrutiny. So I'm proud to say that Fort Bend ISD indeed has a very robust program of auditing going on in our school district. Having said that, I would like to lift up some thoughts that I have for your consideration, Dr. Dupree and the administration. As now Fort Bend ISD is becoming quite large and growing older, strategic planning is important. And I would just like to make this comment by way of analogy. My wife and I lived in our last house for 32 years. And during that period of time, I had to replace the original roof twice, the original HVAC system twice. I had to do foundation repair, upgrade the kitchen and restrooms and painting and that sort of thing. These are all the same things that have to go on in our schools. And some of those things were planned and some of them were not planned. But that was one house. Now imagine when you have over 84 facilities ranging in age from brand new to over 60 years old, that it becomes difficult to keep track of all of that information. And so I'm going to suggest that you consider using an online database that I have used for other clients, and that's called MOCA Systems, M-O-C-A, MOCA Systems. Be happy to show it to you offline. But I want to take a moment to commend the staff for doing their best. I know we've had some turnover in this area, but I want to commend the staff for doing the best they can with what they have to maintain these facilities, because that portion of our maintenance and operation budget is not always sufficient to take care of everything that we need to take care of. Also would like to commend the staff for getting all facilities ready, and for those students who are returning to school and teachers who are returning to school, making them ready for this first day of school in Fort Bend ISD. And with that, Mr. Burdine, I will yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. We appreciate your comments. Mrs. James, do you have any questions or comments, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Burdine, and thank you, Mr. Rice. I just wanted to thank the audit committee for bringing this audit to us. I think it's a great system we've got going on, and I appreciate their hard work. I think that the audit committee, as Mr. Rice described it, is one of our best tools for continuous improvement, and this is a perfect example of how we align the work, what the board has in mind and has envisioned, and we're aligning it to what's actually being executed, and we make sure we stay aligned. And so I just wanted to thank the audit committee, and I guess this is a good example too, and I guess for the audit committee, this is a great example of why we do a follow-up audit, because even though we've had an original audit and it's come to us and we've understood the recommendations, this is a great example of why we need to do follow-up audits to make sure we remain aligned and we can continue our continuous improvement process. So thank you, Mr. Rice and the audit committee, for all your hard work and bringing this to us. I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. James. We appreciate your comments. Any other board members like to make any comments about this presentation? All right. Dr. Dupree, did you have any comments, or did staff have any comments about this, or are we going to get an update?
I was just going to interject that, Oscar and I have invested a great deal of time discussing this follow-up audit, because as you can see, it's not what we would hope to see as a management team. And I know the board likes to see greater progress than that. And we're not going to make excuses. We have had substantial turnover in that department, as well as we faced Hurricane Harvey, mold in the Willow Ridge feeder pattern, and now a pandemic while we're trying to address it. And each of those major events also caused significant delays in the completion of the audit and our response to the audit, to Gibson as well. So, I always appreciate the board's spirit about internal audit, because you do consistently see it as a continuous improvement effort where you hold us accountable for achieving good results. But I appreciate the tone and the spirit and the way you hold us accountable with high expectations that we will address these things. And the audit committee does a great job with their regular meetings of us reporting to them our follow-up and our work, whether we have exemplary audits as we do on some occasions, and whether sometimes we haven't made the progress any of us would have liked to have seen. So, but I just want to assure the board, under Oscar's leadership and with Damian Veltz now leading the facilities division for the last year and a half or so, we are in a great position. And I think you heard Kent say we are making progress, and we're continuing to make progress, and we're going to address these issues in a more timely manner as we move forward. So I appreciate the board's forbearance and consistency in the way that you hold us accountable for these in a gracious spirit, but also with a firm hand.
Thank you for your comments, Dr. Dupree. Thank you, Mr. Gibson, for the presentation, and Mr. Ingram for presenting it to us. We appreciate your hard work, and we look forward to tackling these issues as soon as we possibly can, I'm sure. So with that being said, we're going to move on to 6A2, which is to update on response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. I'm going to begin this evening's report. I'm going to do a brief overview of some of the things we talked about at the workshop last week, just as an update. Then I want to get into our pandemic management plan. But first, I just think it's important to acknowledge, as some have already mentioned, it is the first day of school. And it's definitely the most unique first day of school I have ever experienced. And I'm thinking there's no one who's ever experienced this in our community. And so I'm going to tell you, just like a typical first day of school, some things went great. I have received text messages, phone calls, emails, and social media of just how our team has pulled together to make things happen in an exemplary way for our students and to support our staff. So I've heard from principals who felt like everything was tooled just right for success. And I appreciate everyone who made that happen. I will also tell you, we've gotten some emails and we've seen some activity on social media where some things didn't go well. And that is typical on the first day of school as well. In this environment, almost all of the negativity has revolved around technology. Because we had some students who could not log in to their classrooms, and that of course caused stress in their home, because when you think about everyone is in their own place trying to do this, you can't just walk down the hall and ask for help. You've got to get on the phone. And so we had some long hold times at our help desk today. The lines at our depots where people could walk in for support were lengthy. But I just have to give a big round of applause to our technology team who worked Friday night late, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, taking thousands of calls from community members, from parents, from students, helping them be prepared. And as I've consistently said throughout the day, it's just like any school year, we're going to get through a one day at a time. Every day is going to get a little better, and we're just going to count on that. And so it is a very unique experience, but I feel great about where we are, and I'm proud, so proud of our team that has spent thousands and thousands of hours, foregone vacations. Teachers have worked longer than they've ever worked for the first 10 days, and it still didn't seem enough to get ready. But our team, we're FBISD, and I'm always going to give accolade to the board because of your consistency, the leadership you have provided for 7 years, with the stability we have on our board, the team we have, the team of 8 that we have. We were able to lead this organization with confidence and calm and assurance. And even as we've heard, for example, Mr. Linneman say this evening, there are many parents who are ready to get their kids back in the classroom. And personally, I joined them in that. We all want that. And that is the path we are on. And we're going to start talking about that this evening. First of all, if someone can bring up the PowerPoint, please. I'd like to get started on the first slide. Last week, we talked about enrollment. So I wanted to share that as of August 12th, late last week, we had 90.69% of all of our verifications accounted for. So that was an increase. We were about 83% on Monday last week, and within a week, we took that up to over 90, slightly over 90%. So we are still continuing to pursue the remaining students. And I'm going to ask Dr. Rodriguez, Joe Rodriguez, to just share a few quick thoughts about our continued efforts to engage students to get them verified, enrolled, and in class. Joe?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Dupree. As Dr. Dupree mentioned, we have seen an increase under pending, verified, and total student counts. And the 7% increase under the completion rate has made us extremely happy. We continue our efforts as a district working with campuses and the Department of Student Affairs. We continue with phone calls. We continue with home visits. We are actually extremely proud to say that the Willow Ridge feeder pattern saw a 15% increase, and the Marshall feeder pattern saw a 12% increase as well since the last time this information was presented to the Board of Trustees. So as a district, we are going to continue working with campuses, and we are going to continue working with the Department of School Leadership along with the Department of Student Affairs.
Ready, thank you, Joe.
Yes, sir.
I would go, as he mentioned, you can see the numbers on this slide, but on the next slide, you can see a little bit more detail about the numbers of students, but also we have distributed nearly 25,000 laptops as of today. This number is as of last week, but we distributed about 5,000 more over the weekend. We've got about 3,300 iPads, tablets that have been distributed, and then nearly 4,000 hotspots as well. We had an order of 1,600 hotspots that were delivered today that we began distribution today. We were supposed to have gotten them late last week. They were held up in Dallas with the shipper. They did arrive today, and our staff immediately got them going and distributing them this afternoon at multiple schools throughout our district. So where we had some gaps in that area, that has been addressed very rapidly as well. And again, I can't say enough good things about our technology team. They have gone the extra mile above and beyond to make sure our students have working devices that they can log into and be ready to learn. Another area that we talked about last week was special education. As of today, I wanted just to do a quick update to let you know that we have about 800 students that are planning to return next Monday, the 24th, to the building for face-to-face instruction. Of the 1,400 students that staff recommended would benefit from face-to-face instruction in our special education department, 800 students' parents agreed to those services, 88 at the high school, 202 at the middle, and 513 at the elementary. Those are going to be largely self-contained programs with some dyslexia services as well, but our main focus is to help students meet their unique needs. 83% of the classrooms required to meet the needs of these students have teacher coverage. So I'm very thankful to the teachers who have agreed, who are willing to come in and work with those students, and we are providing them PPE. We've got health and safety protocols in place to protect students and teachers. We are going to have to consolidate some of the programs as we expected, but we're going to be able to serve these 800 students, and we're still in the process this week of identifying staff to close that gap, that additional 17% we need to close of staffing, but I'm confident we'll be able to get there, because at this point, we do have teachers who are not currently special education certified, volunteering to get certified and to come in and support the education of these students. So we're working hard in that regard right now. So I want to thank our special education team for all the ARDs, all the meetings, all the phone calls that have taken place to help make sure the unique needs of these students are met. To that end, we're also providing learning centers at our campuses. And I wanted to kind of get to this because if you go to the next slide, please, because this is something we talked about last week. Since last week's conversation, we have added 2 additional learning center sites at Neal and Schiff elementary schools, and we've been able to increase the total number of seats from 1,100 to 1,672. We've been able to ensure that all staff identified as vital, that includes many teachers as well as staff from a wide variety of categories that I'm going to go over in just a minute, but vital staff that have been asked to come to work, if they requested a seat in a learning center, their children have been provided that opportunity. We still have 4,500 eligible students remaining on an elementary waiting list. So we're continuing to try to grow the program for the next several weeks. Although I will tell you, many people who were admitted seats declined the seats when it came time to accept them. So this has been a very active process with many who were accepted declining for a number of reasons. And then we've been working our way through the list. So between increasing the number of seats and working our way through the list, we have reduced the number of eligible students on the waiting list by over 1,000, about 1,500 students in the last week. So we're continuing to work that list. The secondary learning centers will open next Monday. We're going to have about 300 district employees that requested a seat, and those students are going to be on the campus where their parent works under supervision as well. We've also provided seats for all McKinney-Vento homeless children and foster students who need that seat, although our social workers are continuing to engage those families to make sure that they are wanting those seats, but we've reserved those seats for those students. And as of today, we've got 64 partnerships in place listed on our website where we have trained childcare providers, whether it be private, faith-based, or public or for-profit entities. We've worked with 64 partners in our community to train their staff to provide online learning support for our students in Fort Bend ISD. You heard me talk about vital staff. This is something else that we discussed last week at the board meeting. I wanted to kind of give you a breakdown of how this has played out. So over a couple of weeks ago, we asked all of our leaders to identify all the staff in our organization in 3 categories: either required, vital, or conducive to work from home. So you can see those that are in the required category are operational staff, child nutrition, transportation, facilities, maintenance, individuals that are necessary to keep the organization, the business running. Those in the vital categories are all of us who are leaders. That includes me, the chiefs, principals, people in central office, because these are individuals who need to be on site to lead and do their job. Extended learning falls into that category as well, because they're manning the before and after school program, as well as the learning centers, our police department, nurses, office support, instructional paraprofessionals in the front offices of our schools, as well as identified special education and career and technical education teachers. Then those that are conducive to work from home are all other employees, about 5,400. You can see the number of each of these. So we had about 5,400 that are conducive to work from home. And that includes people like in technology, where as long as they've got their laptop, they can do everything they need to do. So there's a whole wide variety, even some campus-based staff that are still working at home as well. But we wanted to talk about this because we know we had a number of individuals who expressed concern, especially some teachers, that they were included in the vital category and asked to return to work. So I want to show you the next slide where you can see that we have, out of those numbers of the 3,500, you can see we've had about 557 make an appeal to the Human Resources Department by asking for the waiver to not have to return to work. The categories fall into 4 major categories. 147 staff members, including 57 teachers, were simply expressed that they were fearful of exposure to the virus. They didn't fall into the other 3 categories. They simply had concern and anxiety about returning to the workplace. We're asking those individuals to consult with a healthcare professional to determine the course of action and to see if they can get medical documentation. We're working very flexibly with all 4 of these categories, I will tell you, because we want to value our staff each step of the way. For those who had childcare issues, 48 teachers and 133 overall, we're working with them with flexible schedules. We've tried to secure seats in the learning centers for their children. Again, working with them on a localized basis to help manage their concerns and needs. Those that are at medical risk, that are medically fragile or high risk of exposure, including 96 teachers, 258 overall in the vital category, we're asking them to get medical documentation and file that with HR. And then those who are a caregiver, perhaps they have an elderly parent or a spouse who's medically fragile, we're being very sensitive to their needs as well, and they're submitting documentation for us to review as well. So you can see that as of I guess the 13th, we had 587 that had applied for the waiver, 420 were pending, 151 were approved, and 2 were denied. 14 withdrew the request. So again, our goal has been very carefully to be gently asking these individuals to work with them through this process, because over time, we're going to ask all staff to return to the workplace. And that's what you see kind of in these two extra categories. You see the vital that I've just talked to, the 557, but we had 4 staff members in the required category who filed a waiver with HR because of childcare issues or medical issues. And then we had several who were in there conducive to work from home, 26 who are somewhat proactively filing a waiver so that they can kind of have everything arranged later when we do reopen, to have everything in place to not have to return to the workplace. So again, we're working with all of these staff. Next thing I want to get to, though, and I referred several times to when we come back face to face. We are in the process now of developing our transition to face-to-face plan. As we've talked about numerous times, we're planning to phase in students back into our buildings. Today, we can't declare that timeline. We're still working through many details, including the pandemic management plan that we're going to talk about tonight. This is kind of the centerpiece of our conversation tonight. But I do want you to know that we have called a special meeting, a board meeting on the 31st of August, where we're going to go into all the details about resuming face-to-face. And so what I want to get into tonight, though, is the pandemic management plan. So I'm going to ask some staff to talk about it as we get going. Well, let me go back here. On the 31st of August, we're going to talk about face-to-face transit timeline. We want to talk about the transition timeline. We're going to talk about the timeline for parents to express their view about face-to-face or online learning. And when I say express their view, I mean they will make a choice for their family as to whether their children will go to school face-to-face or online when we reopen. And we'll also get more into the transportation, extended learning, and technology needs that are going to be required to support both face-to-face and online. On August 31st, we'll also talk about the resuming of UIL activities. According to UIL, our fall sports and our fine arts can begin practicing on Monday, August the 7th, and games would begin later in August. So later in September, and I think I missed to confirm September 7th. I don't know if I said that right or not, but we are going to talk about that extensively on August 31st as well. And then it's likely we're going to seek a waiver for the additional 4 weeks of online instruction to support our full transition and phasing in of all students back into the building. But all of that will be presented in a comprehensive package on the 31st. Tonight, we want to get into our pandemic management plan. I'm so proud that our team has worked very diligently for several weeks to put together a plan that's going to help manage our decision-making in how and when we open schools, close schools, and I'm talking about individual schools, regional schools in a region, or perhaps the whole district, because we know we're going to be dealing with this virus for a very long time. And so we want to be able to be autonomous in our decision-making. We don't want to be dependent on data that comes out of a database that is serving a 9-county region. We need more specific data that addresses our local conditions in our schools, in our community. I think that's what our parents are looking for us to do. So the overview I would provide is staff has put this plan together that is designed to help us identify the risk level for individual campuses and the district as a whole. We also have specific indicators, data indicators they have spelled out that will help to calculate that risk level. We have district level indicators, campus level indicators, and then we'll also consider the environment in which we're living and working, the community indicators. Of course, you can see that's 3 different categories, and for us, the district and campus would carry the greatest weight because those are the truly localized indicators. And then we've got various responses set forth about how we would handle many different aspects of school, everything from athletics to fine arts to gatherings in our buildings, in face-to-face or online instruction in a building or in the district. So we've got these 3 major sections of the pandemic management plan. Now, the way we plan to use this plan, however, is we're going to put together, we've invited a number of community members to join with some healthcare professionals in our community to serve as a subcommittee of our Student Health Advisory Committee, our SHAC. And our goal is to be able to meet with that team weekly to assess the data that supports these various indicators. Now, we are not using the language of triggers or metrics or thresholds. We are going to put all this data on the table, and every week the committee will have a discussion that is very objective in nature, using this information to be able to reach consensus on kind of where we are as a district at that point in time. And it's important to note that, again, it's not about one trigger says this is what we will do. It's intended to operate as a collective body of information that the people that are on that committee from all different walks of life, including just some parents who have questions and concerns and opinions, all the way to experts in healthcare, to educators. You know, we've got a wide variety of individuals, even some business leaders who have led international efforts around the pandemic response in their organizations. So a wide variety of individuals will be working with us, and they're not the decision-making body, they're an advisory body that will be guiding me and staff in bringing recommendations forward. So it's going to be a very thorough process. I think we've got a great platform from which to build. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to staff. I'm going to Shay, our Chief of HR and Organizational Transformation, to go into a little more detail talking about this pandemic management plan. Gwen?
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. We're going to have Carmela Levy-David actually present the pandemic management plan at this time.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, Dr. Dupree. Good evening. As Dr. Dupree just shared, the pandemic management plan, could you go back one slide for me? Thank you. One more. Thank you. As Dr. Dupree just shared, the pandemic management plan is a system outlining actions to support the district's ability to safely respond to a health-related event affecting our learning community. The plan has three components: the individual and campus risk level, with 2 meters at the top of the plan to identify separate levels: colored green, which is the least severe, colored yellow, which is moderate, and colored red, which is the most severe. The indicators, which are next in the plan, provide Fort Bend ISD with tools to ensure uninterrupted learning for students and guide district decisions. In addition to the 3 levels, the plan includes district, campus, and community level indicators. Each indicator includes multiple metrics that can serve as independent or combined pressure points to signal the need to the district to pivot between levels. The district or campus overall level will be determined by assessing both internal and other factors. And finally, the response actions in the bottom half of the plan outline response actions corresponding to each risk level. The response actions are activities that must occur to minimize instructional disruptions for students and members of our learning community. Next slide, please. The goal of the pandemic management plan is to ensure uninterrupted learning, including safeguarding the health and safety of students and staff, and guiding departments with transitional activities that must occur in each level. There are 3 primary components: the risk level, the indicators, and the response actions. The risk levels determine the instructional modality implemented to deliver instruction. Instructional modalities are defined as face-to-face instruction, online instruction, or a combination of both. The indicators are used to determine when the district may pivot between risk levels. The response actions outline how departments will collaborate to support instruction and district functions. Finally, the assessment of risk levels for the district and campuses will be considered independently based on a combination of factors. For example, if the combination of indicators and guidance indicates the district is red, we may still have campuses that are considered green. The stoplight in the slide at the bottom provides a visual example of what this would look like. Next slide, please. The pandemic management plan indicators, again, include district, campus, and community factors used to gather internal and external data. Internal indicators are composed of district and campus data that will be used as the primary indicators to guide risk level assessment. Examples of internal variables include attendance of teachers and students and district personnel, wellness checks, including symptoms and possible cases gathered through the Live Well app, leaves utilization through the Family First Coronavirus Act, which provides emergency paid leave for employees impacted by COVID-19, contact tracing data gathered by the Fort Bend ISD COVID-19 team, including positive COVID cases and any indications of upward or downward trending data. In addition, several external data points may also be considered as secondary variables in the risk assessment process. Response actions are the next part of the plan, and they define the specific activities implemented to minimize instructional disruptions. For example, instructional expectations outline whether instruction is delivered face-to-face, online, or both. Social emotional support outlines how social emotional learning is delivered when it comes to the service modality for mentoring, the provision of supplies, and mental health supports. Operational expectations outline activities for various departments such as transportation, extended learning, child nutrition, and the learning centers. Next slide, please. This chart provides an example of the types of response actions that might be implemented when Fort Bend ISD shifts a level. Let's look at examples for instruction, athletics and fine arts, and social emotional learning in the first 3 rows. The first row provides activities for instruction. Level 1, colored green, indicates face-to-face instruction with online options. Level 2, colored yellow, indicates face-to-face instruction with staggered spacing for some and online instruction for others. Level 3, colored red, indicates online instruction for all students and face-to-face with staggered spacing options for students in special education or students with 504 plans. The second row provides activities for athletics and fine arts. For level 1, colored green, activities include full participation and practice in sports and fine arts. For level 2, colored yellow, activities include online learning with some face-to-face participation and practice. For level 3, colored red, activities include online learning only with no face-to-face participation or practice. The third row that we will discuss provides activities for social emotional learning. In level 1, activities include targeted emotional support for impacted campuses and classrooms. In level 2, activities include online and face-to-face social emotional learning instruction. In level 3, although social emotional learning instructional support will continue, the delivery method for social workers and mental health counselors will occur based on a case-specific student or family need. Next slide, please. Like Dr. Dupree mentioned earlier, to ensure the pandemic management plan is used as intended, a pandemic community advisory committee will be formed through a subcommittee of the School Health Advisory Committee, or SHAC. The role of the Pandemic Community Advisory Committee will be to function in an advisory role and provide recommendations based on information from our pandemic management plan. Members of the Pandemic Community Advisory Committee will include SHAC representatives and other stakeholders such as health professionals and Fort Bend ISD staff. Once the Pandemic Committee reviews information and provides input to guide decision-making, the district will formulate specific recommendations for decisions, transitions, and timelines to support continuous instruction for all students. Next slide, please. The pandemic management plan has 3 phases. Phase 1 is the completed development stage shared with you tonight. Phase 2 is the refining and restructuring stage of the plan, scheduled for completion in late August or early September, which includes the following: establishing the Pandemic Stakeholder Advisory Committee, detailed alignment of the district comprehensive plan to the pandemic management plan, guidance for staffing levels that allow the safe delivery of services, the identification of vital personnel needed at each level. And finally, phase 3 is the implementation stage of the plan, scheduled for completion again in late August, early September. And it includes determining risk levels and communicating the state of the district and individual schools. Our next steps include sharing collaboration with the Pandemic Stakeholder Advisory Committee and goal attainment for phase 2 and 3 objectives. And now I'll hand it back to Dr. Dupree.
So as you can see, we've put a lot of energy. Staff has spent hours developing this plan. I feel like it's a solid effort, but we definitely want to get the board's questions, comments, feedback on the plan before we engage the committee later this week. So Mr. Burdine, I would give it back to you for questions or comments from the board.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. Great presentation. Mr. Rosenthal, do you have any questions or comments?
I do. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dupree. I'm cautiously optimistic about that. I like the way that you've started to develop, or the district has started to develop its own definition of indicators. I think that's key. We need to, as you said, we are not the entire county, and we also need to develop our own metrics. And I think that's what you're attempting to do here. I have a couple of clarifications. I have an older version because I could not read what was on the screen. So I have the version that was sent out, I guess, over the weekend. So I don't know if any wording has changed, but I wanted to look first at the district-wide indicators. So the way it's written, and you and I had a conversation about this, so I just want some clarification. It says, let's see, number of new positive cases over 14-day period. Okay, so again, so as we discussed, and as I think Carmela kind of alluded to, was that these data are going to be collected internally. So based on students, staff, families, that's what we're going to use to collect data. We're not relying on published data out there on some website or on some other database. This is strictly Fort Bend ISD data. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's the data we will be correcting through our own internal contact tracing, and all reports made to our team from students and staff. Okay,
great. One of the things that we discussed earlier is that it says spread in one feeder pattern with one school confirmed with a confirmed case is what I think it was trying to say. And it seems like that might, so the way it's written, it seemed like that might be the pivot to go from a green to a yellow or a yellow to red. And I wanted to just hear what you have to say about that first before I make any comments.
So Carmela or Gwen, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, sir. When it comes to, and I know which indicator you're referring to, this is actually.
It's the district-wide.
The district-wide,
right.
Yes, sir. And when we look at the spread in one feeder pattern, because I'm looking at the green level in the district-wide indicators, with one school confirmed with a confirmed case. that is not an indication to pivot. That is actually an indication to begin to monitor, to see where we are, and use our COVID-19 team to contact trace to see if there are any other areas of concern at that time.
Okay, that's good, because the way I read this and interpreted it was that, or the way somebody could do that, is that if there's one confirmed case, we kind of pivot to the next level, and I was hoping that was not your intention. So thank you for clarifying that. Again, I like what you've done. It's using our data, what's happening with our staff and teachers, to really make an informed decision. The only concern, and Charles knows what's coming, is, and I'm glad you differentiated from this, okay? Because again, and I want to say it again, we're using our own data, our own indicators, and I think that's important, and I'm glad you folks are doing that. My concern is that the advisory committee may still want to tend to look at the things that are posted on the county website as far as confirmed cases go. Because one, using case data is the absolute worst metric anyone can use. It's not random, and it's highly biased. And as reported by both the state and the county, it's seriously flawed. And the reason that it's flawed is because it's not reported chronologically. So it's basically meaningless, in that you can't extract any trends from it. And that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for trends. And you can't get those trends. You can't get positivity rates. You can make some up, but they don't mean anything. So that data really should not be used. So I'm going to ask that you, unless the reporting changes and that it's reported chronologically, I'm going to ask that you actually not even look at that data, because it's not meaningful. So it's like me, as an analogy I've used with people. It's like me going and plotting the deaths of dinosaurs from the late Jurassic period and plotting them on Monday, August 17th, or Tuesday, August 18th. And then, I mean, if I showed that to your average fifth grader, they would say, but Mr. Rosenthal, they died millions of years ago. Yes, that's what's happening here. That's what we're looking at with these case data. So I'm going to ask that you not use those. The hospital admissions is a great tool. That is an excellent metric. It gets updated every day. Until yesterday, we used to be able to look at fatalities, because again, it was, even though, there's people that say, well, they're coding things as COVID death, even with that, it's still showing a good trend, and that used to be good. But the problem that we have here is that the state and the county are off by about 50%, something like that. The state reports 60 or so more deaths than the county's reporting. And again, that's one thing, but the trend that you want to look for is completely different. The states report, when you plot the state's data, it shows a flat trend. It increased 11 fatalities over the past, since August 3rd. Whereas the county data is showing an increase of 33 fatalities since August 3rd. And that was before today. I have not looked at today's number. So you can't even compare apples to apples to get trend data. So again, this goes back, again, I'm going to applaud you again for wanting to use our own metrics and our own data in order to try to get these kids back as soon as possible. The only other question I have is, there's a notation, assessment of risk level, and maybe you can answer this question. So it said, when campus risk levels differs, when campus risk level differs from district risk level, the highest risk level between district and individual campus, the campus aligns with the district risk level. So it's kind of like you're defaulting to the district risk level over the campus risk level. Am I reading that or understanding that correctly?
So that is actually, Mr. Rosenthal, a late change that needs to come out of the document. We, as we were finalizing plans last week, there was kind of a mindset initially that the district status would govern all campuses, but we realized we're such a vastly large district, we really need to let each campus stand alone.
Right.
So that's a sentence that I think we must have missed as we finalized the final edit of the document.
Okay, well, I'm glad you did that, because that was my concern, was that the district is so big that, you know, really it's going to override that every time. So thank you for doing that. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you for putting a lot of thought into this. I think you've probably caught all the expectations and whatnot. So I'm looking forward to seeing this develop next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mrs. Helliger.
Good evening. Thank you. Very good conversation, and thank you all for putting the thought into that plan. I just want to make sure that the data that we're deciding to use is not biased from, let me back up. The data that we use does have some type of high level implication when it comes to the county and whatnot, because I'm thinking also of kids who may be zoned to different schools that are going to some of our academies and whatnot. So are we taking all that into consideration? Because it's not just a zone school anymore. We have kids that are coming from outside as well that are attending schools, attending certain schools that have academies.
You know, that's a great perspective, Ms. Helliger. And yes, I mean, that's why we are going to have the district level indicators as well. So if you go back, if you put what Mr. Rosenthal said and what you're asking, the campus indicators are intended, the way I'm framed this, is our real issues are how many, we're not trying to get into the science of the matter. We're trying to determine, can we have school? Is it safe to have school? And so when we look at the indicators locally, internally, the questions are going to be, do we have students and staff that are sick to the point where we can't have school? Or do we have so many teachers on leave that we can't have school in that facility? Or has there been so many diagnosed cases that have been reported internally that it's not safe to have school? So as an organization, we're consistently going to be having maybe a classroom that where there's been some exposure that we need to send those children home in a limited environment. But if it's spread too broadly, then it would need to be a campus closure for a quarantine for a period of time. But if I understand your question correctly, you're saying we could be bringing students into that building from across the district because they're coming in for transfer type of programs like the early college and those kinds of things.
Well, you know, not only that, as I'm sitting here listening to you, it's not just students, but it's teachers as well, you know, so you just have to be, because everybody doesn't live in the same feeder pattern, you know, teachers don't come from the same feeder pattern that they teach in. So when you do the contact tracing, I mean, to me, I don't know how you do that without looking at county data.
Well, the contact tracing, though, is done based on direct contact through a reported case or close contact. The way I think we cover, the way we're covered, I think we do have, that's why we've got that third category of community indicators. And those indicators are really, because to follow your logic, we have staff that lives all over the area in multiple counties and multiple jurisdictions. So while we're going to look certainly at the Fort Bend County data, in that third category of community indicators, a broader base is also the 9 county region data that we also have access to. So we've got the broader region, we've got the county, we've got cities, and then we also have our local campus data. So that's why we're trying to have all 3 of those, because you're exactly right. All of that has to go into the pot for the committee to have the proper discussion.
Because I'm looking at, I mean, as I'm sitting here listening to the presentation, I'm looking at you all plotting data from each school based on where people are located, living, versus seeing, putting over the county data or some type of county data over top of that to see what the heat map is. Because if, let's say you have certain population, whether it be kids or teachers or administrators that are coming from a certain area, and then if you look at, let's say it's West Fort Bend or even Harris County, right? A certain area of Harris County that all these administrators or whatnot are coming from. If you put a heat map over there based on the county data of the cases that are in there, you really will see a major issue there, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just cautious. I want to make sure that we're not getting into, we're not avoiding the county data in our discussions.
We are not. That,
Okay.
I mean, that's why we have that third category. It's definitely is part of the conversation.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more of this and how we progress in this area.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Helger. Mrs. James, and then Mrs. Tossan after that.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Burdine, and thank you to staff. It was a great presentation. I'm excited about, I like charts, and this is a great one, and there's a lot of information there. So thanks to everybody who worked really hard to put it together. And I love the color coding. I love the indicators. I love the response actions. It's really great. So thank you. I just want to comment on something Ms. Helliger just said. Her interest or concern about making sure we're using county data. And I think I understand what she's saying, but I also think if we have people traveling traveling to a campus and there's some infections or whatever at a particular campus, that it's going to come up in the district indicators, because we have people, I'm gathering, submitting information through the LiveWell app and then submitting information. You're doing temperature screenings and things like that. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so that's exactly why we are doing both, because we want to be able to track, the district overall status to determine, is the district overall too yellow or red? While we may have pockets of green, what's going on? What's that interaction between the various feeder patterns and between the campuses?
Okay, and I think that so I think that can be monitored, and we can look for trends amongst ourselves, I guess, to see how different campuses are responding and what the trends look like. I think what Mr. Rosenthal said is key. The trends that we see is the most important information, and we just have to be really careful that we understand what the data we're looking at is telling us. So we have to have some people that are looking at the data very objectively, and also really understanding the source and what implicit bias there may be in it. So, so thank you for acknowledging that. So I'd written down here, how are we collecting data? But I think you said about the LiveWell app. And I guess, is that coming in on a daily basis? Is there other soft data that we're collecting on campuses? Is the COVID team on different campuses collecting other data?
Gwen, would you like to, or some member of your team, address that, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, Ms. James, we're going to have a district COVID-19 team who's going to oversee and execute to the district's COVID contact tracing process. We've had contact tracing in place since March. So on a small scale, in essence, we've already been doing and are analyzing these internal indicators, and it's provided us information for us to know how we pivot among departments that have been coming into work since March. At one time we did, need to close one department. We had to pivot another department to work from home. And so as we prepare to scale up and get ready for employees to return and students to return, this pandemic management plan is really our way of formalizing what we've been doing on a small scale. So we will continue our efforts at the district level with our COVID response team. But in addition to that, in order to prepare for campuses that are returning, we will start up a campus COVID-19 team at each of our campuses. And it'll be made up of, a cross section of folks from nurses to our wellness monitors and a number of people to be the boots on the ground to report back up to the district what is happening on a daily basis at the campus. And there's much more to, how we'll manage through this, but we do have a plan that's been defined, and we're gearing up right now our workforce to support those efforts.
Awesome. So thank you for sharing that, so we can kind of understand how the sort of the feedback cycle goes. And I just want to make sure, do we have a system in place, or is there a way we can incorporate into that system a kind of a positive feedback loop, like people that have suggestions or people who have things that are going well? Because I think we want to build on our successes, our campuses that are doing things well. We want to learn from that and replicate that, kind of like do we have any kind of positive feedback loop built into our processes?
Could you give me an example of what you're thinking?
Well, let's say that we have, a campus that's quickly ready to move to yellow or green. And maybe there's some things that campus is doing well, either because of their cleaning protocols, because of their contactless entry into the building. I'm not sure what all the protocols you're going to put in place, but maybe there's some suggestions that people would make or notice that are going well that would give positive feedback. So it's not about just who has a temperature and who doesn't, or who has a cough and who doesn't. It's more about what are the positive practices we can build on to accelerate our timeline and get to green, because I think our goal is to get to green.
Yes, I understand now what you're asking. I do believe that we could leverage our campus teams to, well, in fact, we will have the leads that are at each campus convening as a group to share statuses that are going on across the district. And so absolutely there's an opportunity there to share what's going well, how are other campuses moving from a yellow to green. So yes, I would agree with that practice.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. And then are we also going to be looking, another data set is maybe data from last year, what our leave percentages were, what our attendance rates were, things like that. Is that fit into the picture as well?
Yes, ma'am. We do. We have our HRIT team that is already pulling data, looking over the past 3 years at our teacher absences, so that we do have comparable when we do return and we start monitoring the absences in these conditions. And the pandemic management team is also building out user cases and coming up with scenarios so that we are prepared when we do get folks back on board to kind of understand what might happen and how that might play out. So we're in the works. We've got phase 2 and phase 3 still to go, and lots of good work ahead of us.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate all the work the team has done, and it's really this is really great. It's a great visual, and I hope it's helpful to the community. And I hope that as a gentleman who is speaking tonight, is eager to get back in the classroom. Lots of folks are eager to get back in the classrooms, and we know that our best teaching and learning is going to happen face to face, and it's especially important for some of our neediest kids. So I think that's all of our goal, and I appreciate you guys' thoughtful efforts in helping us to get there. I have one other request, Dr. Dupree, and that is, I think as this is going along, if your staff could make some type of chart or something so the board would have knowledge if that's a weekly or semi-weekly or twice monthly knowledge of sort of where the different campuses are, red, yellow, green, so that we can just be knowledgeable about it.
Yeah, well, that's actually going to be a public facing website.
Awesome.
Yeah. We want it to be very transparent.
That's great. I was worried you were going to make us go to each campus website and click on that website to find out what their rating was, and that sounded horrible.
That's one idea, though. I hadn't thought about that.
No, dude, that's a bad idea. One chart, just something. Thank you. I appreciate everybody's hard work. It's really exciting.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mrs. Tossan, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. I appreciate it. So I too appreciate all the work, the hard work that the administration and others have put into this. This is a massive undertaking, and it has been well thought out, I think, and I appreciate seeing that we're going to have community members involved in some of this and have a team of people looking at this. So I appreciate all the work that's been put into it. I want to agree with Dave and agree with Addie. I think the county, we have to look at the county data, but I think the county has already kind of qualified the accuracy of some of what they're reporting. I think that's inherent in what they're collecting and the accuracy of what they're collecting. So I appreciate that we have other indicators and other data that we're looking at, because we can't just look at county data. And I really want to stress that, you know, one of the reasons that we closed the country and closed everything down way back in March was because we wanted to flatten the curve. We know that 99% or whatever the specific percentages are going to recover from COVID if they get it. What we wanted to do was flatten the curve and not overwhelm the healthcare system. And so a lot of the questions I asked when we had our medical panel were around not overwhelming the healthcare system. So I want to agree with Dave that I think hospital admissions and what's going on in our hospitals is going to be critically important. I want to make sure that we're still in touch with not just the one CEO that we had on our panel, but that we're in touch with several of our hospital leaders to see what's going on in your hospital. Let's make sure that we don't do anything to overwhelm our local healthcare system. And at the same time, while Fort Bend County, you know, to Addie's point, while Fort Bend County may be on red and Harris County may be on red, there are other counties that may not be. I still think it's important that we look at the hospital data. And if we're trending really well with with our hospitals, to me, that informs our decision making. And I agree with Dave that the trends are really important, but I do think we have to have the county data in there and just understand exactly what's going on with that data. I know you said, Charles, you know, we're going to stay away from the science per se, but I think we have to have people who understand the science on our team, and we have to have the people who understand how to read the data and what's behind the data and all of that. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness, and I just want to make sure that we're keeping that at the forefront of what we're doing. And yeah, I agree with some of Grail's comments as well. I think it's great that we're going to have an outward facing page or something on our website. That was actually going to be my question. Are we going to have something where the community can see sort of in real time or maybe updated daily? I'm not sure how you're going to do that, but I think parents and teachers and community members are going to want to see what's going on in our schools and you know, how many cases we have reporting and what does quarantining look like. So my question around reporting within, you know, internally within our organization, how are we verifying that someone has a positive case? Do we have a process or a procedure in place where they have to submit their test or something along those lines so that we're verifying that we're getting true positives.
We do. Gwen, would you like to speak to that, please?
Yes, I'm actually going to ask either Glenda Johnson, who currently her team processes employee contact tracing, or Pilar Westbrook, who is planning for students returning and how they're going to work through that process. So either one of them, if you don't mind sharing what the plan is.
Hello, good afternoon. Yes, currently we do have employees we do require employees at this time to provide us with their results. We do have a form that the campus or the department leader provides to us. And once we get that information, it's our trigger to contact them and to obtain those documents from them. And from there, we work on a process for them to be cleared. They also have to have another form in order to be cleared to report back to work.
So how's that going to work for our students when we go back face to face?
For the students, we have a similar process, and I'll let Pilar speak to the student portion.
Absolutely. So we plan to follow the same process that they've used within our human resources department. It's worked very well for us, managing what we've seen come in. We also have the traditional methods that we use in our nursing department to make sure that all our health services are met in a HIPAA, FERPA compliant way, as well as ADA. And so making sure that we follow requirements of privacy and then also keep everyone else safe at the same time is going to be our primary objective.
Well, really, the privacy aspect of it, that was going to kind of be my follow-up, right? I know we have FERPA and HIPAA and all kinds of privacy things that govern, but it's almost impossible to do that if you're contact tracing and quarantining. I mean, I know you can maybe not give the name of the student, but you're at least going to know what class is having to be quarantined and that type of thing. So how are we going to manage that? And my follow-up question is, and this may go to somebody else, but I assume when we're quarantining, teachers who are not sick but who have to be quarantined will then be sort of reassigned to some kind of online learning platform. Is that correct?
Yes, we've told staff that if they have to quarantine, they will be able to work from home and not have to use leave. So we will use them however we can to continue serving.
And how about the confidentiality question?
So I'm going to respond to that, and there may be someone, whether it be Rob, Rick, or somebody who has a better answer. But I think part of the confidentiality, if you think about if you quarantine a whole group of students, there's no one really knows who carried it necessarily into the classroom. You know, you've had to call all of the parents, but you're not necessarily identifying. But I will tell you that my consistent question, and again, we may want one of the attorneys to weigh in on that aspect, is simply to do contact tracing. There's a degree of privacy that seems to me that's on the edge of what we should and can be doing, but maybe that weight overwhelms that right. I don't know. Rick or Rob, can you speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Dupree. I think the most important thing, we are limiting the number of people who have access to the information. I mean, like you said, like Dr. Dupree said, we request information, but we can't require it. And it's a small number of people who have access to the information. And I think that's the one thing we're concerned about, is we protect the privacy of the individuals who have provided the information.
So I'd like to request that our team of attorneys, maybe Rob and Rick, or that you guys do a little more research on that, because I feel like with a public health concern like this, parents are going to want to, and staff are going to need to ensure that we are doing contact tracing. And I can think of a couple of scenarios where it's going to get a little tricky. So if we could maybe think that through, or do a little more in-depth research, or if there are public health exceptions to certain things, I think it's going to be important for us to know the answer to that, because I can foresee some scenarios where it might get a little tricky and we might have some confidentiality issues, but at the same time, we need to ensure that we are doing appropriate contact tracing in order to be able to appropriately and properly inform parents and students and staff.
Absolutely. Yes, we can do that, and we will provide that back to the board just for clarification and for everybody. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's all I had. I'm looking at my scratch here because I wrote down a couple questions. I think that's all I had for right now. And I just want to say again how much I appreciate. I know this was a mammoth project. It's unprecedented. And we really had to start from scratch and sort of invent the wheel. And I'm sure there are going to be other things that come up. I agree with Grail. I think we need to find a way to get back face to face as soon as humanly possible, as soon as we can, as soon as we can do so, and do so in a safe manner. And I appreciate the plans, at least the beginnings of plans that we put in place here to that end.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Mr. Rosenthal, did you have a few questions or comments or?
Yes, I'd like to follow up. So, Kristen, thank you actually for bringing up the privacy issue, because that's a huge issue when you start getting into contact tracing, as you know. It applies to the private sector as well. If all of a sudden somebody doesn't show up at work, everybody kind of knows probably why, but you start getting in all kinds of HIPAA issues too. So it's a big issue. But Charles, I want to get back to this community indicator and data, because you do have to put science to this. Okay, you can't just accept data just because somebody puts it on a website, and it is a big issue. Okay, because it puts a lot of fear out in the community, and we know the county has admitted about these data dumps, and even before that they don't know where this data is coming from, especially over the last few weeks. They're only getting data. Well, let's put it this way. I spent an hour on the phone with some folks at the Texas Department of State Health Services today on a Zoom meeting with another local official. The data is not in good shape. What they're getting through these data dumps, they're only getting positive cases. Okay, so again, it's all biased data. So what I'm specifically asking is that you not use case data from either the state or the county, because it's basically the same for now, until it can be put and sorted into an order that you can extract trends from it. So as far as the hospitalization goes, that's not county data. That comes from C-Track. So that's a completely separate thing. So we do have to understand the science behind the data, because otherwise people are making decisions based on emotions, okay, and not data. And so that's what I wanted to ask Addie is I'm not sure what you understand these case data to be that the county puts out. Because you do project management, you understand trends. If I were to sit there and put the electricity usage by day, you can put a trend to that, right? But then if I then tell you after that, say, oh, by the way, those are from a month ago, and I only took them from houses that began with the letter on a street address that began with an A. Well, it's not very useful. And that's kind of what we're looking at. So we all just want accurate information so we can make scientifically based decisions about the safety and the risk level of our population in Fort Bend ISD. And so that's my question. And again, Charles, I'm just reiterating that you do have to understand the science and what's in this data. And I know you know things about these data too, that maybe you just don't want to say, but that's my comment. And
well, let me clarify. My intent into what I said is to express that what we're trying to do is use data and follow trends that affect our ability to have school in our buildings and the staff and students in those buildings.
Right, and I think you're doing that with.
And that's what I was trying to express. There's lots of debate that can be had about data on the state level, on the county level, but we're about the things we have here. You know, in how many cases have we confirmed within our schools?
Yeah,
how many teachers are on leave?
Right.
How many students are absent? Those are the kind of data we want to rely on.
But you're not going to be able to glean that from county website that just dumps positive cases.
That's correct.
Without explanation and without knowing the chronological order of when those cases occurred. Because from that, nobody can extract trends or any other information. So
well, this is Addie. So I wanted to just reply. So yes, Dave, I totally get that. As a project manager, as a computer scientist, I understand trends and analysis. What I don't want to do is ignore the fact, for example, that the county is in red. All the emails and messages and text messages that I receive on a regular basis. Can you hear me out?
No.
I can hear you.
Yeah,
I hear you.
I'm responding to, like we in the boardroom, I'm responding to your facial expression and your gestures there, okay?
Gotcha.
So, that's okay. So is that the data might have some certain biases in it, is the data that we have right now. However, I totally agree with what Kristen said, what Grail said, and I even agree with some parts of what you're saying, Dave. So let's make sure that, that's very clear. What I want to make sure is that if we are in the red, based on the messages and discussions I've been having, that's why a lot of teachers are, as quickly as they want to get back to the campus and students want to be back to campus, the overarching risk or fear or knowledge that they have is whether the county is saying that they're red, yellow, or green. And I think if, as we prepare to go back to school, we have to make sure that, one, that we look at that data. And I get it. So you have, if you have information, back up. If you have information that nobody else has, right? So, or very little people have, then that needs to come to the forefront. I don't know if Dr. Dupree and team will, as they use science and figure out the data, we could be going back and forth for a very long time on which data to be used, how to use the data, whatnot. They're going to have to take some type of educated stance on the data and positioning that they're going to use in order to get us back into the classroom. I don't want this conversation to go into, now we have to get a whole data analytics team onboarded in order for us to figure this out. And that's what I don't want, I hope this is, this conversation is not leading to that. That's what I want to make sure. But I think and I get you, Dave, the data is not good data. We have some data, we have to extrapolate the data that we do have in order to make, the good data out of that to make some good decisions to get our kids back into school. But I know one thing, while we're still red, it is very, very difficult for people, parents, and staff to want to come back to the school. I don't care what the data says, as long as we're red, that's the overarching messaging that's happening right now about the county being red. And I think the county being red, it has to do with the data for the hospitals. I think that's that is part of the decision making.
Okay.
Are you saying no?
I don't think so, but nobody's, here's the problem, Maddie. Just because somebody puts in an email and says we're red, they can say we're purple or green or yellow or orange. It doesn't mean anything. It has to be based on something. And the only criteria that we have heard as a group was based on positivity rates. Okay, that was about a month ago. And the hospitalizations are cut dramatically. If you actually go to look at CTRAC data, you can look at the whole region, the whole county. So all I'm saying is somebody has to make a decision and define it on data. Okay, not just what they think a color is.
No,
And
no,
so,
the
no,
color,
that's what
the
they're
color,
doing.
no,
I'm
the
not
color
gonna-
has,
wait,
the
wait,
color
wait,
has
hang on,
data. The
hang on.
color has data to it. That's
No,
why they're making it a
what is,
color.
but what is, nobody can explain it. Okay, nobody can explain it, but I agree with you that it does raise a lot of fear. Okay, and I know Charles doesn't want to get into this. I can tell by his expression. He doesn't want to get into this. Okay, but again, it has to be based on science. It has to be based on data. And there's nothing that can be gleaned from the data as reported that's useful. That's all. That's where you and I disagree. We all want the same things. We all want kids back in school, but we just disagree on that. And if we can see useful data that's meaningful, that shows trends, I'm all for using it. But I don't think that that's possible. So,
all right,
my opinion.
I think to my point, I think to the point, Dave and Dr. Dupree, is that I'm going to trust that we are making a good, educated positioning on the data that we're going to be using in order to get our kids back to school.
Thank you both. I appreciate it. I think there's been some good to take out of this conversation, and I think that we can all agree that we need to be thoughtful about what it is that we do. And I think that at this point from the presentation that I heard tonight, that we're on the right track with doing that. And so, Dr. Dupree, we look forward to more updates on what that may look like and what it is that we're using to make those decisions. So I do also agree that we need to get back to face. I mean, I think that we can all agree with that. I just wanted to make the point that I too agree with that. And from the presentation that you presented tonight and your team presented tonight, I'm really excited about the plan and the indicators. And I know this is extremely difficult, but I feel very hopeful after the presentation because we have a plan. So I know that we may have to modify or adapt. I understand that, but we have a plan. And so I'm very hopeful and excited about that. Going back toward I don't remember if it was the beginning or the middle or where it was, but we had mentioned about the SHAC committee. Does the board currently have any representation on that SHAC committee?
Yes, the board has a representation on SHAC, but from my understanding that we're doing a subcommittee where the chair of the SHAC has asked him members, and I don't think any of the board members have been asked to serve in that role.
Excuse me, that subcommittee, well, I would recommend that, I don't know if we can, I would like to think that that we could recommend, or at least I would like to recommend that we have one or two board members at least on the subcommittee. I think that our voice is important. And so I would like to express that in some kind of way. And I think it'd be natural for Mrs. James to do that, being that she serves on the SHAC committee. So I think she'd be good for the subcommittee. And if there was maybe someone else that we could ask, I think that would be good. And that's my opinion. How can we do that?
If you ask us to do it, we'll do it. Personally, I'm not in favor of that, if I'm going to be honest with you, though.
Okay.
Because it's an advisory committee to staff that will be making recommendations. And I think having board members involved with community committees of that nature creates a unique dynamic for the conversations. But that's just my perspective. Certainly, if that's your desire and you want to appoint someone, I won't argue with that. I'm just telling you my view.
No, I can appreciate that. I was even, if that were to be some conflict of what your vision of the work may be, even an ex officio member or someone there just to listen, or maybe as a resource, at least may be helpful. Maybe we can consider something like that.
I'm open to your guidance or, conversation about that.
Okay. Well, at this point, I feel like that may be helpful at least to have an ex officio member, maybe Mrs. James, if you're willing to do that, to listen, to see what's going on, and to, I think that there's some way that we can bridge the gap there between honoring the role of the advisory and honoring someone who from the board's there to listen. Did you have any comments about that, Mrs. James? Or I don't want to put something else on your plate, but what are you thinking about that?
Okay, so right now I serve as an ex officio member on the SHAC committee, and mostly I'm just there to listen. I guess I'm willing to be on the subcommittee if you and Dr. Dupree think that that's a good plan. I'd be happy to serve.
Okay, I appreciate that. Anyhow, I think that would be helpful, Dr. Dupree, and we can talk about that again if that's necessary. But I just giving my input on that. Once again, honoring the work that they're going to be doing. So that's all I have this evening. Thank you very much for the great presentation. And once again, I'm really excited. Let's move along to 6A3, which is the COVID-19 procurement update.
Yes, sir. I think, I don't remember, Brian or you or Oscar, I think it's you, Brian. Would you give that report, please?
Yes, sir. Is everyone able to see and hear me? All right. So at the March 13th board meeting, a resolution of emergency declaration was passed by the Board of Trustees, and each month staff presents any purchases with non-awarded vendors made under that declaration. For the month of July, $36,000 was expended for touch-free hand sanitizing stations, and total expenditures made to date under this declaration, including those made in July, are $82,078.84. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
Brian, I was thinking we received a question earlier from a board member about how some of this might be potentially subject to reimburse from FEMA. Could you speak to these expenses in that light, please?
Yes, sir. So we are currently actively working through the reimbursement process for expenditures we believe to be eligible for reimbursement. And at this time, the primary source for reimbursement include CARES Act funding administered by the county, TEA grants, and grants through the Texas Division of Emergency Management and FEMA. And just as a point of reference, the district has received about $562,000 from county CARES Act funding. And we have a number of reimbursement requests that are currently under review by the county. In addition to that, there are several other grants that have been made available over the last week or so, including one for TEA that would reimburse for personal protective equipment that was purchased in the March to May timeframe. And again, we're actively working through those grants to determine requirements and begin the submission process.
All right. Dr. Dupree, can you hear me?
I can.
My screen is freezing here. I'm sorry. Do we have any questions or comments? All right. Thank you, Mr. Gwynn. We appreciate the information. Next is closed session. We will now convene in a closed session under the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Chapter 551 under the following sections. For the purpose of private consultation with the board's attorney on any or all subject matters authorized by law. To consider purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property, personnel matters, security matters, student discipline matter or complaint, or personally identifiable information about public school students. We are now convening in closed session. Mr. Rozier, are we now recording?
If you can give Mr. Smith a second to take the slide down that we're sharing.
Okay, no problem. All right, we're good, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rozier. We are now reconvening open session. Next on our agenda this evening is to consider action on closed session items, which are none this evening. So we're going to move right along to board member reports. Mr. Rosenthal. Mr. Rosenthal, you're muted if you're talking.
Yes, sir. I just had to pull it up here. Let me get it so I can actually read it.
Don't forget that last one I couldn't write.
Oh, of course. The one that's there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, what happened here? Hang on. It won't let me. There we go. Okay. Here we go. District activity, board member district activity report, regular business meeting, communications audit interviews, which were very well done. Fort Bend ISD, a close-up outlook with Dr. Charles Dupree, part 2, leadership launch, 2020 summer graduation, checking in with Charles live, part 3, new teacher orientation and launch, scoring of leadership 101 application packages, virtual back to school discussions with Mr. KP George and Charles Dupree, board workshop meeting, Tasby executive committee meeting, Tasby officer nominating committee, Tasby director committee meetings, Tasby board meeting, Fort Bend Chamber of Commerce Education Division Zoom webinar featuring Charles Dupree, Tasby strategic planning subcommittee meeting, Tasby focus group and SBOE framework for school board governance. I know Jim's been busy here. Monthly Zoom webinar with Commissioner of Education Mike Morath, NSBA training for virtual delegate assembly meeting, NSBA virtual delegate meeting, Fort Bend ISD reimagine, love kickoff. I think it meant to say live kickoff. Fort Bend ISD school supply drive at the Ismali Center in Sugar Land. That is it.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Next on the agenda, 10B is going to be special reports. Mr. Jim Rice will present a special report on Tasby meetings he has attended, as well as Team of 8 training. Take it up from here, Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. I have given a full report to Mr. Rozier and for him to use and including in the meeting minutes. But Mr. Rozier, if you wouldn't mind sending it out to the trustees with the attachments, I would appreciate.
Yes, sir, no problem.
Have been really busy with a lot of meetings. Thank you, sir. A lot of meetings. Suffice to state that at the Tex Ed conference, formerly called the TASA Tasby conference, I believe, Mr. Burdine, you are if we vote tonight, you'll be the delegate, official delegate for that, and Mrs. Haliger is the alternate, I believe, and that will be held virtually. And among other things, you'll be voting on the slate of officers, as well as 12 open positions for a Tasby director. Over 20 people have applied for those seats. I'll be traveling to Austin in September to appear in the nominating committee and help identify the candidates for that slate. Commissioner of Education Mike Morath has been conducting a Zoom meeting every month with all of the Tasby directors. And in my memory, no other commissioner has spent more time with the Tasby Board of Directors than Mike Morath. So I know he's working really hard. Not everybody agrees with some of his decisions, but he is working extremely hard to support public education in Texas. Tasby is conducting a new strategic planning effort. They do it every 5 years. We're in the middle of it now. The most notable thing is the State Board of Education is currently revamping the required Team of 8 training. Dr. Phil Gore, who is the Division Director, Board Development Services for Tasby, whom we've met with before, is serving on the advisory committee. It was thought it would be helpful if there were some sitting school board members on that advisory committee, but it was deemed too practical and the idea was dismissed. I have attached a brief history of Team of 8 training and a draft copy of the current framework, the current thinking and framework surrounding it. And I really recommend that we have a discussion about this at some point in time and invest in the XG governance training for our board because the State Board of Education and the Texas legislature continues to chip away at local control. And if we really want to have local control, we need to be working as a good solid team of 8, aware of the issues. And most of that revolves around team building and generating trust and mutual respect. So I encourage this board to engage with the XG governance training going forward. That's really all I had to report on. I've also given a list of the TASB conventions, which this current one would have been in Dallas. It's going to be virtual. And then note that going to the year 2026, none of them are going to be in Houston. So we'll be traveling. That's really all I have, Mr. Burdine. I'm happy to answer any questions now or offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. And we do appreciate all the time that you've been spending with the commissioner. Thank you for representing our district. And we appreciate all the hard work that you and Tasby does. So thank you for that. And while we're on the subject of Tasby, I would like to publicly announce that Mrs. Allison Drew was accepted into the leadership program, Tasby Leadership. And I think we should be proud of that. And I know that she will represent our district well and learn lots so she can help take that information and bring it back to Fort Bend ISD to continue our path in a positive direction. So thank you, Mrs. Drew. We appreciate that. I also wanted to make one other small comment before I pass it off to Mrs. James. I wanted to congratulate Kristen and Shannon on their anniversary. Tonight, I know we've not always publicly said this, and sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. And anyway, lots of Mrs. Grail James just had her anniversary how many weeks ago on a board meeting night or a month ago?
Back in June. June.
So my point being, all of us on the board and staff as well make sacrifices during these board meeting times, and we appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. I just had my sandwich, which is not exactly my usual anniversary meal, but I'm happy to sacrifice for the district. Our teachers are working hard to sacrifice, so it's good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Whether it be birthdays or whatever it may be, we all appreciate everyone's work on these board meeting nights. And then from there, I will pass the mic over to Mrs. James. She wanted to make a few remarks about the first day of school. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to you, Dr. Dupree, and to all your staff for just a remarkable first day of school. And the tone that you set in all those emails and live sessions leading up to it has made people comfortable with what didn't go well and celebrating all the things that did go well. So I just want to thank you especially for that. It was really remarkable. We really are reimagining school and how we do things, and you're bringing that to life. So I wanted to thank you and acknowledge that. I also want to just say that when you shared some statistics earlier about over 30,000 devices being distributed to students over the last couple of weeks. That also is remarkable, and it's a testament to our value of each and every student in making sure that they can participate in online education. So thank you very much for you and all your staff that's gone to remarkable efforts to make that happen. That's quite a statistic. The other statistic that I think is fantastic, and I know the numbers are up because I sent people to the website today and to call their principals or email their principals, is the enrollment verification, close to 91%. And I'm sure that's climbing. And that too is fantastic. And I know we're going to hear higher numbers going on into the future. So thank you. That's a lot of legwork and a lot of effort. So I think what you said in your email to staff on Sunday night is true. We've got an elephant in front of us and we're eating it one bite at a time. And I texted a lot of teachers about that today, and one bite at a time is going to get it done. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the staff who made today possible.
Thank you. A lot of people worked hard, I'll tell you that.
Thank you, Mrs. James. I'll just say something short here, but I also wanted to thank you, Dr. Dupree, and all the staff. As it was the first days for Mrs. Tossan and for Mrs. Helliger and Mrs. Drew. I also had two students that, and I know the others had students in the schools at one time, but I wanted to say that we had my wife Andrea worked this morning. She was covering for another dental hygienist, and so from the beginning of school until 12 o'clock, I had the opportunity to be hands-on with the kids as they started their class and witness all of that going on. And I was really impressed and I was surprised, and I can understand how it's very difficult for lots of families, but I wanted to say that it was, in my opinion, very doable. And my kids were engaged and they were learning, and I was happy to see their teachers in their, I assume it was their classroom or some space in the school, teaching. And I don't know, I just was really impressed, and I want to thank you all for that. And I look forward to, I know we had some statistics earlier, and I don't know what other type of statistics for online learning you can have, but if we have any more, I'd like to hear those.
Good. We'll be providing regular updates.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So once again, thank you to you, Dr. Dupree, and all the staff. Moving along, was there anyone else that wanted to make any comments about that? Mrs.
Yes.
Helliger?
Yes, thank you, Jason. Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay.
We can.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up with your statement that you made, both yourself and Grail. I think the anticipation, the discussions, the messaging was just right on spot on what was needed to prepare everyone for the first day of school. The video reminders so that everyone knows how to get set up for the first day of school was excellent. Matter of fact, I made sure my son watched the video on how to use Teams before he could play his video games on Sunday, so to make sure that he was prepared. So he went from, just to give you an example, he went from, I don't know how to do this. What are y'all talking about? This is crazy. I'm not doing this. To after the first session today, even though there were some issues, I'm not going to say it was a perfect day, but it was a perfect soft launch, to use Grail's terms. Alex and his friends were using the call fixture on Teams. They were calling each other. They learned how to download it onto their cell phones, the Teams platform onto their cell phones. So going from not knowing how to use the platform to, I now have it on my cell phone. I can chat, I can do everything on my cell phone. It was pretty amazing, the transformation within an hour of them using the Microsoft tool. I do think that they had some, maybe some connectivity issues, but they all worked through it. Everyone was in good spirit. And I think for a first day of online school during a pandemic, we did a fantastic job. And kudos to all of you all for your participation, for your planning, the development. I know we still have work to do, but it's okay. You know, I like to use the word, it's okay, just really simple. And I look forward to us getting better over the next few days or weeks to come. And I challenge our parents as well to think about their own way that they react to some of the challenges that we're having. And based on that, our children will react as well. And learn how to make some lemonades out of lemons. You know, if you're experiencing some issues. Of course, there are some issues that are really, really high priority that we need to deal with. But for the majority of us who are experiencing a few setbacks, we'll be okay. We'll be okay. And I trust that the district will work with yourself, myself as a parent, you know, to work through those kinks. So I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Helliger. Mrs. Allison Drew wanted to say or make a comment, excuse me. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna make it a really quick comment. I do want to thank you, Dr. Dupree and staff. I really know how hard you guys worked through some of those last kinks. And, you know, I was really, really, really excited to see how easy it was for the twins to get online today. I mean, they're just starting high school, new format for them. They truly enjoyed everything. All of the instruction as to how to get on and how to connect was there. They actually didn't experience any connectivity issues. I mean, everything went smoothly, and most of all, I think they were just so happy to see some of their friends, even though it was virtual. So I think that the teachers were really prepared really well for the first day. And I know a special thank you to IT, because I know that they have been working really hard on some stuff behind the scenes to pull all that together. So just wanted to let everybody know that I truly, truly appreciate what you've been able to do in such a short period of time.
Thank you, Mrs. Drew. Mrs. Helliger, I'm sorry, Mrs. Helliger. Mrs. Tossan.
Yeah, thanks. I'll make it quick. Since I have kids in school too, I needed to speak up and say thanks. I've got my last one who started high school today, and things went pretty smoothly. We did have one of the teachers who got dumped in the delete. So, but he sent us the email and let us know in advance and was available for questions. And so the teachers really rolled with it and handled some of those difficulties really well, at least from what I saw on my end. I got a couple of text and Facebook messages, Mrs. Burke and a few others who sent me pictures of their Teams meetings with all of their kids present, showing me that, you know, all the kids have shown up and they were able to walk, and these are elementary school kids. So I was very impressed by that, very impressed by how the teachers are leading and managing, and impressed by all the kids getting on. My sister-in-law posted pictures that recess in her house was a dip in the pool for her kids. So I know my niece and nephew were enjoying that, being able to get out in the pool for their recess time. And I had 2 college students at home too, who were online, and everything went kind of smoothly. They each had their own spot. So I wanted to give a shout out to every teacher who's listening. And for those who aren't listening, those of you who are, please pass it along, that the board thanks you. And I personally thank you as a mom and as a board member. And I know it's been tough and I know it's all new, but you guys have really, really stepped up to this challenge. And I appreciate, especially as we go forward, that you're going to keep doing great things for our kids. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Mr. Rosenthal wanted to make a comment as well.
Well, I feel old. I don't have kids in school anymore. I'm happy to hear your stories, and I know there's several teachers that I talk to fairly regularly, and I know for a while they were very overwhelmed, but it sounds like for the most part it came together, and I appreciate their effort. I appreciate all the admin's effort, and I'm glad to hear that things sounded like they went fairly well. So very happy to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Thanks again, Dr. Dupree.
Thank you.
Good work. We will now move along to our consent agenda for this evening. May
Mr.
I,
Levine?
go ahead, Mrs. James.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest that we remove item 11A1B, that's EIC local. It came to my attention today as part of the policy committee that we maybe need a paragraph around the cap and overflow issue that we talked about last week. And so I'd like to suggest that we table that and pull it off for now and get the policy committee to come up with the paragraph and not try to wordsmith that tonight.
All right, thank you, Mrs. James. May I have a motion?
Mr. President, I move to approve the consent agenda in its entirety with the one exception of item 11C3.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. Rosenthal. Do we have any discussion?
Yes, the item that you actually want to, well, I guess 11C3 we want to do separately, but the one I asked about was 11A.
Yes.
Sorry about that. I'll take, that's
sorry.
my...
I'm sorry, Mrs. James. I goofed. It's
Okay.
11A, what is it?
11A1B.
1B. Well, Mr. Morris, I've got to ask how I can put the genie back in the bottle now. Can we withdraw this motion by unanimous consent? I think we can.
Yes, you can withdraw by unanimous consent.
All right. How do we get unanimous consent?
Well, if hearing no objection from any trustee, Mr. Rice can simply withdraw it and restate the motion.
Sounds like we have no objection, Mr. Rice. Please continue.
Mr. President, I move to approve the consent agenda in its entirety with the exception of item 11A1B and item 11C3 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. Rosenthal. Do we have any discussion? Mr. Rice.
Well, no discussion on this motion. When we get to 11C3, I will.
Okay. All right. We'll now vote via roll call. Mrs. Allison Drew, please state your name and vote yay or nay.
This is Allison Drew. I vote yay.
Mrs. Addie Helliger.
Addie Helliger, yay.
Mrs. Grail James.
This is Grail James. I vote yay.
Mr. Jim Rice.
This is Jim Rice. I vote yay.
Mr. Dave Rosenthal.
Dave Rosenthal votes yay.
Mrs. Kristen Tossan.
This is Kristen Tossan. I vote yay.
This is Jason Burdine, and I also vote yay. This motion passes. Now we'll move along to item 11.1. Is it 11.1C3?
11C.
11C3.
11C3.
There you go.
Mr. President, I move to accept item 11C3 as presented.
I second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. James. Do we have any discussion, Mr. Rice?
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. I simply wanted to bring this item up again and to reiterate a comment I made at the agenda review, and that is I have been working with PBK on another project at a different school district, and we're all familiar with the term educational adequacy, but they're actually developing an educational adequacy index to be used in evaluating schools similarly to the facility condition index. You may recall the facility condition index takes the cost to repair the school or bring the school up to a standard divided by the cost to replace the school, and that yields a coefficient. If it exceeds 60%, it's simply an analytical tool that begins to tell you whether or not you're throwing good money after bad and should consider simply replacing the school. But the educational adequacy index also factors into that. And we're working with the database in the cloud that I mentioned earlier. And I simply wanted to lift that up as a topic of discussion. Dr. Dupree, for your staff, I know they'll do a great job with this, but PBK is actually doing groundbreaking work on this. And I think we'd be foolish not to take advantage of it. Those are all my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Did we have any other discussion? Hearing none, please vote. I'm sorry, Mrs. Tolson.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to follow up on Mr. Rice's comments and say that I agree with some of what he said. And didn't we have PBK do this work for us last time around, or am I misremembering?
That is correct, we did. That's why we're continuing the effort with them.
Yeah, so I agree with Mr. Rice and would reiterate that, because I think that that continuing that work and having them move forward with this kind of work this year is going to be important.
I would interject that we are, and Oscar might want to speak to this, Mr. Rice and Ms. Tassan, but we are, as we did back in 2018 for that bond, we are doing an educational adequacy factor as part of our work with PBK. And we are also, we do not use the MOCA database, but we do use a different database to maintain the life cycle of our facilities. Oscar, would you like to speak to that briefly?
Yes, sir, Dr. Dupree. What we're using is Smartsheet, and before Smartsheet, we were using Maps, and Maps was just a very difficult program to operate. You know, if you didn't have the right people entering data, it just was it was not a program that we wanted. So when we looked at doing this work back in 17 for the 18 bond, we asked for a different program, and we went with Smartsheet. The good thing about Smartsheet is that it is an Excel-based database that can be, all the information we have in it can be imported into MOCA. So what I would like to do, because I've heard of MOCA, but I'm not completely familiar with it, so I'd like to look at it a little further. And all the work that we're going to be doing will not be lost. It can go right into that database. So I would like to just learn a little more about it.
Thank you, Mr.
To you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tassan and Mr. Rice and Mr. Perez. Do we have any other comments or questions? I apologize. My computer's periodically freezing up and I'm missing parts of conversation, so sorry to cut anyone off if I do. With that being said, no, we have no other discussion about this. We will now vote via roll call. Please state your name and vote yay or nay. Mrs. Allison Drew.
This is Allison Drew. Yay.
Mrs. Addie Helliger.
Addie Helliger, yay.
Mrs. Grail James.
This is Grail James. Yay.
Mr. Jim Rice.
This is Jim Rice. I vote yay.
Mr. Dave Rosenthal.
This is Dave Rosenthal. I vote yay.
Mrs. Kristen Tassan.
This is Kristen Tassan. I vote yay.
And this is Jason Burdine, and I also vote yay. This motion is passed. We will now move along to our next agenda item, which is 12A1, our action item to the consider approval of the synchronous attestation for the 2021 school year. May I have a motion?
Mr. President, I move to approve action item 12A as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. James. Do we have any discussion?
Yes.
Mrs. Tassan.
So I just wanted to express some concern with this attestation. I very much appreciate the document that that administration provided us, that you, Dr. Dupree, and Dina Hill and everyone put together, letting us know what things we were going to be doing in order to meet the needs of our students, and particularly in these specific areas that are listed on the attestation. I have concerns with two of them. Specifically, the first one, the districts ensure that all students, including students with disabilities and English learners, are able to receive instruction via synchronous methods and provide accommodations or resources to support when necessary. And the second one, that student IEPs are followed regardless of learning environment, such that students with disabilities receive a free and appropriate public education. And my concern is, and I appreciate the things that you guys list, and I appreciate all that we're doing to work to meet the needs of our students and make sure that what we're attesting to here is going to happen to the best of our ability. But the fact of the matter is it just can't. It just can't. So, I mean, I can think about my own daughter, just for example. There are many, many students who I know who attend school in the district. Abby's not in the district anymore, but if I think back to when she was in high school or middle school or elementary school, she was a fully included student with intellectual disability. And in order for her to for her IEPs to be met, part of the accommodations, not just modifications, but the accommodations that had to be done, we had a full-time paraprofessional. We had full-time support in class. And that was in her core classes. And she absolutely needed someone sitting with her in those classes to help her with reading, with writing, with notes, with understanding, with focus, just any number of things to help her get through those class periods. And I appreciate that we're providing some of these things virtually and via online, and I think that that's fantastic. But I guess my real beef here is with TEA, because I sort of feel like that the state is trying to cover their own butts, so to speak, for lack of a better word, because Texas is in trouble in special ed and has been in trouble in special ed for several years now. And this is sort of their way, I feel, of saying, well, we had all the districts sign off saying that they could do this, and we had all the districts say that they could support these kids. And so we're covered, federal government, and you can keep sending us money because, you know, the onus is now on the districts to do what they said they were going to do. And I just don't feel like it's possible. I don't feel like it's possible as a 20-year advocate who teaches educators how to provide these things to students. And I don't think it's possible as a parent who knows what my daughter needs and who has provided these services to my daughter. So I'm very concerned about signing off on this, because I just know for a fact that we can't do it for every student. I know that we have talked about compensatory services, and I think that that's fantastic, and we definitely need to plan for that. But I have a problem signing off on this document in whole. My question is probably for Mr. Morris or Mr. Scamardo. Can we separate out the first two parts of the attestation and vote separately on it, just so that, because at this point, I probably feel compelled to vote against it. I don't really want to vote against it because the rest of it, I feel like we can do. But if I could just have the first two separated out where I could approve the rest of it, I know that may not, if the first two fail, TEA may not like that. And, you know, I don't know what that's going to mean for Fort Bend, but I have a real problem signing it like this.
So, Trustee Tassan, you could make a motion that to amend to remove it, but I would agree with your statement If you amend the attestation, you certainly can do that as a matter of board vote, but I can't predict for you how the TEA will respond to your amendment of the attestation.
Well, perhaps the answer is to carve it out. And I don't know how the rest of the board feels or how the rest of the board's going to vote. So it may pass. I mean, me voting against it may not make a difference, but, you know, perhaps that we should look at putting together a resolution. If we pass the rest of the attestation and we don't pass the first two, then perhaps we can send it along with a board resolution saying that we don't, we just don't agree with them requiring that we sign off on something that really doesn't follow educational best practice. I mean, TEA knows better. It's just not best practice. So what I'll do now is just be quiet, let the rest of the board weigh in. You know, I don't want to throw a monkey wrench in the works, but I just can't. I have a lot of reservations and just can't support that. You're on mute, Jason. You're on mute.
Mrs. Helliger has a comment, and then actually, let's go. Mr. Scarmato has something to say, Addie, if you don't mind. Mr. Scarmato, will you please make your comment, and then we'll go to Mrs. Helliger. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Scarmato. You're on mute if you don't know. Go ahead, Mrs. Helliger. We'll wait for Mr. Scarmato to come.
Okay, so I would tend to agree with Ms. Tassan around that. I don't know if we could actually fulfill those statements. Just my own personal experience, listening to other teachers, other parents rather, based on us even preparing for this school year. I think I feel like we're setting ourselves up for failure, and we're putting ourselves in a corner. And I don't know what that means to us, you know, one way or the other. I don't know what it means to us if we don't do it versus do it. But I feel like we're being put into a corner and being asked to say something that is not true or that we totally can't fully do. I think we will be making our extremely best efforts to do so. Will we be 100%? I don't see how that we could do that. Just on the pure magnitude of what we're dealing with during the pandemic, and the resources are available to support our kids during this time. I don't see how that's extremely feasible. And unless Dr. Dupree thinks something that we don't know. I mean, I'll be glad to hear from him on his approach and his confidence level that we could actually meet those statements.
Oh, I will tell you, if you don't mind me responding directly to Ms. Helliger's question, Mr. Burdine. What's on my mind is that, you know, we are committed to doing the best we can in an online learning environment. But we are also counting on the need to use compensatory education to close gaps later. But like some of you, and I think Ms. Tassan, you already expressed this. I mean, I heard from a friend today who has a child that relies on that one-on-one resource, that aid in the room. And today, the first day, he was just very distraught and upset, and the parents were struggling, wondering what the next few weeks are going to be like, because you can't provide that one-to-one at home, even online. They need the adult, and I've heard that from multiple parents. They need the touch of that adult there with them, guiding their work. So, I mean, I think if the board, though I would go, and Rick and Rob may have thought about this, but I'm going to go back to what we've talked about before. At this point in time, what's coming out of TEA is in the form of guidelines. They are asking for an attestation, but I think it might be worth us taking the time to challenge that attestation, especially on this ground, to determine what is our legal grounds, because what's at risk if we do not do it the way it's framed through TEA is funding. I mean, this is how they're funding us. We have to attest that we are doing synchronous learning and attest to those elements that are on that document. So if we have attorneys, and I know we've met with David Thompson, I know Rick has been involved in this, if we want to push a little harder and challenge that and do what we know is right and stand on principle, not just checking a box to secure our funding, then I'm fully supportive of that, because I do agree that is a stronger position and more the right thing to do. What we've tried to do as staff is to address the reality of what we're dealing with, that we want to do our best online, and that we believe we can close gaps through compensatory education later, through practices later. But I would agree it's not the ideal circumstance. They will all do better with original instruction that's well supported from the outset.
So,
Wait, Mrs. Helliger, if you don't mind, Mr. Scamardo would like to make a comment, and then Mrs. Tallsand wanted to make a comment, and then Mrs. Helliger, you can make a comment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. And to respond to Ms. Tossand's question is, I think it is appropriate that there be some form of statement, whether it be in a resolution form, or if you or a minority of board members can't support the attestation, that the rest of the story be a statement submitted to the TEA so that the board is on record that this is not the way that this board thinks TEA should be approaching this. Because if you just submit the attestation without saying that, you do run the risk that the TA isn't going to hear what you're really thinking about the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Scamardo. Mrs. Tallsand, you would?
Well, I think we also run the risk of, if we sign this and say that we can do it when we know that we can't, it's not only not honest, but what kind of legal implications does that bring? And that's really a rhetorical question. I don't expect to get legal advice right now on that, but I think that's something we need to think about. I think what Dr. Dupree said a little while ago about the student is true of, I mean, you need to multiply that times probably hundreds. I can think off the top of my head of dozens of students that this doesn't work for. So I think we know that guidelines are guidelines. I think we've received some advice on that already, about whether or not funding can be tied to guidelines. And I think I don't feel comfortable moving forward. If this is just a suggestion or a guideline from TEA, I think that it's worth this board, if we're in agreement, standing up and saying, no, we're not going to check these boxes just because you want us to check boxes when we know that this isn't possible to do for these children. And I agree that we should have some sort of resolution perhaps that says we can't do that. If TEA wants to not give us funding because of that, I mean, I'm willing to fight that too, because I don't think TEA should be asking school districts to say they can do something that they know they can't do. So that's, that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you. And Mrs. Helliger, I apologize, but I skipped over 2 of our board members before you speak again, if you don't mind. Mr. Rosenthal, Mrs. James, and then Mrs. Helliger, you can make a comment. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I agree. I mean, I think I questioned this last week, and I think signing off on this means that I agree that the district is able to do this. And I'm hearing from the experts in the room that really this is, we're trying to do our best situation, but we really can't provide a lot of these services unless it's done in person. And so knowing that, I don't know how I can sign off on this, and being asked to do so while a funding carrot, or not a carrot really, a funding threat maybe is being held over us, I'm not going to do that. So I can't support it. I do agree that we should send a message. Again, I trust that the district is trying as much as possible to provide services, but the examples that you've given, it's obviously that as long as we're all online and we don't have the staff, then we can't do that. So knowing that, can't sign off on it.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mrs. James.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. Okay, so I hear Mrs. Tossan and Mr. Rosenthal, well, everybody, what everyone has said. I have a question. Is the fact that we've gone through the process of having the ARDS and the fact that some parents have signed up for face-to-face where we can provide certain services and others have opted out of that, does that make this so that we are compliant with this statement?
Dina?
Okay, well, good evening. Yes, I think so. I think the purpose of us working through individual ARDs and going through all of the different things that we're doing is so that we can consider students' needs individually, and having the face-to-face instruction is specifically designed, at an earlier date, is specifically designed for those students who could not access a FAPE online. In addition, the compensatory services, we won't really know too much until we're able to assess students, but what that attestation is doing is saying that we will ensure a FAPE, and if a student's not making a FAPE, we will come back later and consider the impact of the services and provide a compensatory services. And I will tell you that TEA, they're following, as you noted, Ms. Tassan, they're following the federal guidelines. So if you remember when all of this began, there was a discussion at the federal level of whether FAPE would be waived, and that would take an act of Congress, and the decision was that would not happen. And so TEA's hands are tied a bit because we're taking federal money to implement the IDEA, and TEA has to ensure that districts do the best that they can to follow the FAPE or to give a FAPE. And I think our district has gone above and beyond what many districts have done, because we are having ARDs, because we are doing face-to-face at an earlier date. And we've also committed to, we will go back for students that did not make the progress and consider compensatory services. And TEA has also offered some funding for compensatory services, and we have applied for that and have some monies set aside that TEA has awarded us to provide compensatory services. So I do think TEA is doing the best that they can in this situation because of they have to follow the federal guidelines. And I think that even though we understand that this won't work for all students individually, the way we're approaching it, I do think that we can offer a FAPE, and if it hadn't been provided through compensatory services, we can make up those services.
Thank you, Mrs. Hill. Let's see here. Mr. Morse, did you have any legal advice to help us move forward?
I do. So first I want to piggyback on what Dr. Hill said. And that is, as I read that particular attestation, I don't think that it requires you to guarantee that you will provide a FAPE. I think the way it's written, it presumes that if you follow the IEPs that are developed after ARD committee meetings, it's the expectation going in that a FAPE will be provided. But I'm not sure that it requires the district to essentially guarantee that you're providing a FAPE. But setting that issue aside, it would be best if the board can approve those attestations that it can agree to and set aside the ones that it cannot. so that, following up on what Mr. Scamardo said, probably the best way to handle sending a message is to reserve those attestations that you cannot approve so that you can focus any messaging about them that you would like. And then at a subsequent meeting, have the board pass a thoughtful resolution expressing your reservations about approving any particular attestation that is of concern to you.
Mrs. Tossan, did you have something to say before we move on?
Yeah, so I can make the motion to amend, but I want to say specifically that the second attestation does not just relate to free and appropriate public education. It says students' IEPs are followed regardless of learning environment, such that students with disabilities receive FAPE. So the problem with that statement is that the IEPs are followed regardless of environment. If you take that phrase out, I don't have a problem saying that it is our expectation that regardless of environment that we are providing FAPE. Those are two very different things. So that's the concern that I have, because I don't think we can attest that all of the IEPs are being followed. I write IEPs. Dina knows this from writing IEPs. Attesting that the students' IEPs are being followed is not an appropriate thing, I think, to ask of board members during this time. Asking us to ensure that they are being provided FAPE was one thing. And I know probably the rest of the board members, not everyone fully understands what that means. And so that's kind of problematic. Also, the first attestation says that we ensure that all students will receive synchronous learning and provide accommodations and support when necessary. That's the other thing, is that we're ensuring that we're providing those accommodations when necessary. And like Dr. Dupree said earlier, we cannot do that in all cases. We cannot meet those IEPs in all cases. I guarantee you that child has in his IEP that he has to have a one-on-one paraprofessional aid in the classroom. We cannot provide that right now. So I just want to be very careful. If maybe, and perhaps as we're drafting a resolution, what we need to do is say we can change the wording and we can attest to some of these things if we change the wording. But I have a lot of concern over how a couple of these are worded. So I just wanted to put that out there.
President Burdine, may I ask a question of Dr. Dupree?
Please, sir.
Dr. Dupree, do we have a deadline by which these attestations have to be submitted?
Yes, we do. Deanna, is it, or I believe it is September 7th. Is that correct, Beth?
Yes, sir. That's correct. September the 7th.
So theoretically, we could, since we have a special call meeting on August 31st, we could theoretically work on this, and I'll bring this back for board action on that agenda.
Why don't we do that?
So why don't I would like to propose that we amend and take those two attestations out, and if we can approve the rest of them, and then perhaps leave the rest of it for consideration with a resolution or something along those lines for the next board meeting with everyone's agreement.
Well, which thing is simpler? Is it simpler to do it all at once so we have everything all together? Or is it because the way I understood this when I was asking about it last week is that it's a compliance exercise where you're filling in an online form and checking boxes. So it almost seems as if they can't submit it until the whole thing is together, but I'm not sure. So what's the situation on submittal? Does it even matter if we do part at a time and part, like, it seems to me smarter to do the whole thing all at once when we've looked at the whole thing and we've written the resolution to allay everyone's concerns.
Do we have a response to that?
I would agree to that with that too, Grail.
If it's okay, why don't we move forward with that plan? Let's pull this entirely and come back on the 31st of this month and have the conversation again once there's some work done.
So
We have-
I would support that.
President Burdine, it might be best that you just entertain a motion to table the matter because you already have a motion and a second, I believe. So
Okay.
I think it'd be best if you asked for somebody to move to postpone it to your next regular meeting, or well, until the August 31st meeting.
I'll move that we table the matter and postpone voting until the August 31st meeting.
I second that.
We have a motion by Mrs. Tossan and a second by Mrs. Hilliger. Do we need to vote on this now?
Yes.
All right, do we have any discussion? Hearing none, please vote via roll call. Mrs. Allison Drew. She's having some issues with her, she can't, so Mrs. Allison Drew, okay. Can she vote with a thumbs up, Mr. Morris, or a raise of the hand?
So long as you can see that, yes, she can.
We are being live streamed, so Mrs. Allison Drew, please raise your hand to vote yay or thumbs up, both. Okay, good. All right, Mrs. Addie Helliger, please state your name and vote yay or nay.
Addie Helliger, yay.
Mrs. Grail James.
This is Grail James. I vote yay.
Mr. Jim Rice.
This is Jim Rice. I vote yay.
Mr. Dave Rosenthal.
Dave Rosenthal, I vote yay.
Mrs. Kristen Tossan.
Kristen Tossan, I vote yay.
This is Jason Burdine, and I also vote yay. Motion passes. We will come and we'll come back and revisit this on the 31st of August here shortly. Next on our agenda is to review future board meeting agenda items. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. Give me 1 second. I was focused on that conversation. Wanted to go over this with a little more detail than I usually do. Sorry for the delay.
No worries.
It is because there's several key items on here. So in August, on the 31st, the plan at this point is to come back and discuss the transition to face-to-face and all of that detail that we talked about earlier. We also want to spend some time doing the superintendent formative evaluation discussion that evening. And I can see now we just added another item to that agenda for the synchronous attestation. In September, we'll be back then. We'll continue to talk about COVID. I do believe September will be a big month because there'll be more decisions to make as we begin moving toward face-to-face. Staff asked today that they'd like to move the student achievement report to October due to all the focused effort on the COVID opening of school. And the fact is that we have very limited data to report anyway, since there was no state accountability. But we do want to provide the annual student achievement report, but we'll try to do that in October. In September, we'll be doing the public hearing on tax rate and then adopting the tax rate in September, as well as hearing the internal audit report on the child nutrition audit. And as we do every fall, we'll be seeking approval of the review. And this is not necessarily revisions. There might be some minor revisions, but annually the board reviews and affirms the fiscal and budgetary strategy, the continuing disclosure strategy, and the investment strategy. We'll also be looking at any class size waivers, which seems ironic in an online environment, but we're still obligated to complete the class size exception waivers if we have any classes that exceed the 22-to-1 for grades 4 and below. In October, we may adjust a little bit of this since we're moving the student achievement report, but we still need to do a good update on social emotional learning. And then of course, in anticipation of the election in November, we'll be doing the board recap of continuing education. We'll also be working with the board's legislative liaison during the next couple of months to put together the legislative priorities for the upcoming session that will begin in January if everything remains on plan. And then we'll be seeking approval of campus improvement plans and district improvement plan performance objectives, as we always do in October. October 28th, we're scheduled to conduct the superintendent's annual summative evaluation. And as always, we'll be providing you that document, which includes the amendment that you did back in June to address the COVID response. And then we'll, in November, we'll seek approval of the 2021 superintendent evaluation instrument. And I would also point out in November, we'll be presenting the school boundaries. If we do any this year, at this point, we're still considering whether we need to undertake that while we're in the pandemic. The only school boundaries that we were planning to address this year are the elementaries in the Willow Ridge feeder pattern relative to the full opening of the Early Literacy Center at Ridgemont. And we've got some work we've been doing on that, but we need to determine, is the community going to be ready to engage and the school boundary committee during the next couple of months. So we'll be back to you with more recommendations on whether that work should proceed or not later in September and October. That concludes my update on future meeting agendas.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I have a comment, a question.
Go ahead. Sorry.
That's
Mrs.
okay. Thank you, Dr. Dupree, for that thorough update. I also noticed that on our calendar in October, we have scheduled, the board has scheduled our normal listening tour. I don't know if we're thinking about doing that still, but it might be kind of interesting if we could figure out how to do it on a Zoom platform with some breakout rooms or something like that. I just thought I'd mention that because I do think the community has a lot to add to the conversation. We always learn things when we do that, and maybe there's a format we could figure out to ask parents and community members, have some prompting questions or things like that around various topics so we could continue to get input from the community.
Thank you, Mrs. James. We appreciate your comments. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Dupree and the team and staff. Good meeting this evening. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Do you have a second?
Second.
This meeting is now adjourned. Good
night.
evening, everyone.
Y'all, good night.
Good night.